Chapter 325. The reason why Dake wanted to start with a dress was not because he liked dresses. He just took his promise seriously. During his duel with Elsie Kevins, he promised Fairy EV that he would find a way to get her a dress after he learned how to craft armor. Although the armament card had limitations when it was used on the enchanted fairy, Dake estimated that with his current level, he would not be able to craft a proper armor that required a large amount of magic power. If he could piece together a set of armor that was slightly more useful than the outfit card, he would be very lucky. In short, since it was just an initial attempt, it did not matter which armor he made first. Using a small dress in the fairy craft, wood carving, as a reference, Dake picked a piece of wood from the material box and started carving. Carving a small dress that did not need to be too detailed was actually quite difficult. The most difficult part was the hollowing out of the interior. For beginners, there were two different levels of difficulty between carving the exterior and the interior. Remember the website, VIP Kanshu. VIP but Dake had an idea when he was learning how to carve the human body. Things like this that required hollowing out of the interior for carving could be done in a modular way to simplify the process. In other words, the small dress could be divided into 2 or 4 parts, leaving a structure that could be assembled at the contact points of each part. After carving all the parts and assembling them together, it would be a complete dress. Using this method, one could avoid the interior carving. Moreover, this was the prototype of the armor crafting method. After spending nearly an hour, Dake finally finished carving the small dress. The dress used the template of a lace dress, but his finished product did not have any lace. In short, he continued carving the vest and bracelet. Because the model was about 30 centimeters tall, the matching dress, vest, and bracelet were also small. When it was almost 9 o'clock, Dake thought about it and added a sun hat. Finally, he put the sun hat on the head of the puppet and the entire dress was completed. Although it wasn't painted, it did look like it. Dake looked up at the time. 9:30. There's still plenty left. Therefore, he put away the tools and materials used for carving and prepared to make his first attempt at triad equipment refining. The triad armament refining array that our vet had created paid particular attention to the combination of the mind, magic, and armament. It could only be refined into an armament card if one were to personally make clothes or weapons. However, there were no requirements for the specifications of the clothes or weapons. It was just that, apart from some special types, the refined equipment could only float within a small range of sizes. So, even if the dress in Dake's hands had been successfully refined into an armed card, there was no way to put it on the fairy Ibu for the time being. But it doesn't matter, I'll just make a suitable set later. The armed series of magic cards belong to a branch of the prop card, and the equipment cards and weapon cards also belong to a branch of the prop card. There were generally 2 ways to make this type of magic card. One way was to refine a ready-made prop into an item card through magical refining. The other way was to use raw materials to refine it directly, just like weapon casting. Dake had once used the second way to refine the energy potion, which was to pour the raw materials of the energy potion, the mixed juice of dried white fruit and blue fruit, into refining array number 3. Finally, the energy potion card was refined. However, our vet's triad equipment refining was more inclined towards the first way of thinking. It was to refine a ready-made armament as the core. Moreover, it was completely different from the orthodox method of refining an item card. The triad equipment refining had extremely high requirements for the mind and magic application, and had lower requirements for supplementary materials. Self-made armament as the core. Mind power as the furnace. One's own magic as the fuel. The combination of the 3 was the triad equipment refining. In terms of concept, it gave Dake the feeling that it was somewhat like the refining in the cultivation world. It was a little out of place with the style of this world. Although the triad equipment refining array was only the prototype of the number 99 refining array known as the Arvet refining array, the difficulty of the triad equipment refining method based on it was already very high. The quality and mastery of mind and magic were 2 insurmountable mountains. According to Dake's understanding, the difficulty of the triad equipment refining method should be between the refining of the fusion card and the zoo card. Under normal circumstances, under the premise that there was no guidance, It was actually quite impossible for him to master the triad equipment refining method by himself. However, fortunately, this refining method was very compatible with him. Whether it was the mastery of mind power or the quality and quantity of his own magic, he had a certain level of confidence. The only shortcoming was the simplest, self-made armament for others. Now that he had slightly overcome this shortcoming, he could more or less begin to try the first triad equipment refining. Just yesterday, he had already prepared all the required materials. It could be said that everything was ready except for the east wind. Gulp. After he finished drinking the apple juice and passed it to the little devil beast, Dake finally began his first attempt. After all, the triad equipment refining method was Arvette's work when she was a student. Its uniqueness was mainly focused on the later stage when she began to inscribe the triad equipment refining array. In the early stage, the general refining method of the equipment card was basically applied. The general refining method of the equipment card was the same as the magic language. It was taught in the second year. However, the related teaching materials were placed everywhere in the library. It only depended on whether one wanted to learn and whether one could learn it. Dake obviously belonged to the category that could learn it. The general refining method of the equipment card was also only one method. It was not as complicated as the magic language. He followed the steps in his memory. First, he needed to properly process all the materials that he needed. Then, he sorted them and put them away. After that, he began to brew the magic potion. The main thing that was used here was a special magic potion called the red spider lily. The red spider lily was a bright red color. According to legend, it was a flower of the other shore that bloomed in the underworld. The dead wandered in the void of the underworld. Occasionally, they would come across that patch of red. Once attracted to it, the red spider lily would transform into the thing that they desired the most, the thing that they were reluctant to part with, and the most untouchable thing. It would make them feel like they were in a dream and unknowingly nibbled away. Since the red spider lily was named this way, it was naturally because it also had the effect of transmogrification. Many things involved in magic technology were taboo in the eyes of ordinary people. A magic potion like red spider lily was even more of a contraband. However, in the field of magic tutors, it was one of the most commonly used magic potions. Equipment cards, weapon cards, and even venue cards like Zoo all required red spider lily as the base. Its position in this type of magic card was like the magic elven card and the elven honey. This was because the essence of this type of magic card was a kind of application of real projection. After smearing the red spider lily evenly on the blank magic card, the magic card will have the foundation of transformation ability. After about 40 minutes, Dake finally pushed the refining experiment to the later stage where he needed to use the triad armament refining array. He carefully checked the half-finished product on the table. After confirming that his first creation was passable, he then began to inscribe the triad armament refining array on this half-finished product. The triad armament refining array was a three-dimensional refining array. The difficulty of inscribing it was much higher than a flat array diagram. However, Dake had already done enough practice for this. He poured magic into the magic pen. After spending a full 10 minutes, he finally finished inscribing the triad armament refining array. Within these 10 minutes, he did not stop at all. The magic output was stable and smooth. It had already exceeded the limit that ordinary people could achieve. The final product was an almost perfect sphere. This was the only refining array that Dake knew of that could present a complete sphere. However, successfully inscribing the triad armament refining array was only the first step of the triad armament refining array. The next step, the mind smelting, was where the real dissuasion began. The foundation of the mind smelting was to inject the power of the mind into the triad armament refining array. This array, which was already extremely complicated, would transform into the mind smelting furnace. In order to do this, one had to first understand the power of the mind. What was the power of the mind? As the name suggested, it was the power of the mind. Of course, this was nonsense. Dake had actually come into contact with a lot of the power of the mind. The foundation of Red's mind summoning spell, which was the bond between the sorcerer and the sorcerer fairy, was a type of power of the mind. The other type was when he used White's magical beast, Stag, to release the ultimate skill, Light of the Mind. That was also the first time he came into contact with the power of the mind. It was also after that he had the most basic understanding of the power of the mind. It was because of this that he could gradually confirm that the 7 deadly sins were also a type of power of the mind. Pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, bliss. Each of these sins represented a type of power of the mind. Therefore, since he couldn't use the light of the mind, and hadn't mastered the mind bond, the only power of the mind he could use was the deadly sins that he had. How to guide the deadly sins, and how to use it. In fact, he already had a mature system. It's time to confirm the possibility. Dake calmed himself down and took the thinking bottle that he had already prepared from the corner of the experiment table. There was only 0.5 points of bliss in the thinking bottle. That extremely thin layer of halo seemed to be reflected by the light and was almost invisible. He picked up the magic brain pipette and inserted the tip of the magic brain pipette into the layer of membrane at the mouth of the thinking bottle. He slowly rotated and sucked in a trace of halo at the tip of his mouth before gently taking it out. This point of bliss was probably not even 0.1 points. But for this experiment, it was already a rather extravagant move. Dake was even a little reluctant. He focused on observing the glowing sphere of the triad armament formation, and dripped that trace of bliss into it. The moment the halo touched it, the originally indiscernible trace of bliss seemed to be diluted as it flowed out along the surface of the glowing sphere and quickly spread throughout the entire formation. This phenomenon was exactly the same as the soul-watering that Dake knew from Headmaster Arti. Although he had already expected it, Dake could not help but exclaim, "Just 0.1 points of bliss is enough to transform the triad armament formation into a mind furnace. Then next, I'll throw in the self-made equipment, inject magic, and smelt it." Dake did not hesitate and directly put the entire set of clothes into the mind furnace. Then, he pointed the magic pen at the top of the formation and gradually injected magic. As magic flowed into the furnace, the white light gradually intensified. This mind furnace was like a bottomless magic extractor that greedily devoured Dake's magic. The mind furnace required an extremely large amount of magic. Normal magisters would even need to drink a few bottles of mana recovery potion to last until the end. Feeling the magic in his body quickly depleting, Dake could not help but be shocked. Only a saint, like Yvette, could develop such a method of drinking magic like water. "Dilu beast!" Dake softly exclaimed. The Dilu beast, who was already prepared, picked up a bottle of mana recovery potion and poured it down his throat. After drinking this bottle of mana recovery potion, Dake's already extremely high magic recovery rate suddenly increased and finally supported him to complete the entire process of the mind furnace. Finally, he injected magic and pressed down with the magic pen. The spherical formation quickly shrunk into an extremely thick layer of light that covered the surface of the card. When this layer of light sunk into the card, the entire process of armament formation was considered to be truly completed. Dake looked up at the clock on the wall. "It's already 11 o'clock?" The magic guide fairies probably noticed that the experiment had come to an end and could not help but come over. Especially Meow Meow, who was holding the fat head fish wooden sculpture in its mouth. It was very interested. They probably all knew that the success or failure of this experiment was closely related to each of them. They waited for about 3 minutes. The layer of light gradually thinned and finally sunk into the card surface. On the surface of the card, a picture of a full set of wooden dress gradually appeared. "It seems to be done? 2 in 1 4,000 plus. This part is very difficult to write. It took a long time to write, so it's even slower. It should be faster later. What does everyone want to see that has to do with mind power, not limited to 7 sins? You can write it down here. Just write the name. I'll check if it's useful." Chapter 326. Even though this armed card seemed to be completed, the image displayed on the card was slightly different from what Dake had imagined. He frowned slightly, picked up the card, and infused it with magical power. As the information returned, he had a general understanding of this armed card. Card name, Wood Armor. Type, Item Card. Effect, Defense plus 10, slightly increases the ability to attract moonlight. Looking at the panel, there seemed to be no big problem. Armed Card was indeed a type of item card, and the panel would directly display Item Card. The name of the card was also very ordinary and suitable. Remember, https://m. Vipkanshu. VIP. After all, this was indeed an armor made of wood. As for the effect, for such a crude product to have a defense plus 10 attribute, it was already beyond his expectations. He originally thought that it would only have defense plus 1. He didn't expect that not only was the defense bonus okay, but there was also the additional effect of attracting moonlight. Attracting moonlight? Don't tell me that after wearing this wooden armor, you will automatically become the brightest child in the night? Dake laughed dryly, and used the usual summoning technique to summon this set of wooden armor. There were generally two ways to summon an armed card. One was to summon it out of thin air, and the other was to summon it with the target as the target. If the summoned target was the target of the summoned equipment would be equipped directly. However, Dake used the summon out of thin air this time, and the purpose was to find out the overall appearance of this set of armor. As the card lit up, a full set of armor appeared on the table. A straw hat, a vest, a short skirt, and 2 bracelets. This was the entire set of wooden armor. Other than the faint white light on the surface of the wooden armor, there was almost no difference from before the armed card refining was completed. The size hasn't changed. The material hasn't changed. Wood, it's still wood. Dake checked carefully and confirmed his findings. Although this set of wooden armor had the name Wood Armor, it was actually a set of wooden carvings, and the core had not changed. Some of the carved buckles, belts, and frills were still made of wood. This was completely different from what he knew. One had to know that Yvette was able to use the triad armament formation to refine clothes into battle armor. That was the real armament refinement, which greatly changed the material of the armament itself. What exactly went wrong? Is it because the carving is not detailed enough? Or is it because of the great sin? Or is there a problem with the materials? Dake fell into deep thought. However, his understanding of triad armament forging came from the principle of a Some things that seemed simple and natural to the principle might become difficult for him to overcome. It's too hard. With that in mind, Dake took a deep breath. Fairy Ibu's antennae had unknowingly wrapped around his wrist, gently rubbing it as if to comfort him. He turned around and picked up her breasts. He smiled and said, "It's okay. There's only motivation when there's difficulty." Fairy Ibu, the Dilu beast said, "It wants to say that its dress is going to be delayed again." Fairy Ibu, Classic rumor. All in all, Dake's mentality was quite good. It was already very lucky that he didn't fail the first time. The inadequacies could be solved through repeated experiments and research. Originally, this kind of high-difficulty refining experiment couldn't be completed in one go. After the astronomy class on Wednesday night, he actually received the information on the magic circle of love from Professor Midia. However, after looking through it, he found that he couldn't understand it at all. It was even more impossible for him to redevelop the flower card. This directly caused the large amount of materials he prepared to be useless. He could only separate them and use them for other experiments. If he wanted to understand the magic circle of love, he probably needed to learn more about astronomy and astrology. However, he still didn't show any talent in divination, so there was a bottleneck in the study of astrology. Under normal circumstances, if he wanted to continue his research, he could only place his hopes on Ibu. If little Ibu could learn something, Dake could continue his research on the flower card, with her help. Fortunately, he didn't need the flower card urgently. Now that he had the foundation for research, the research on the flower card could be restarted at any time. Therefore, it was possible to start research in the future. This kind of mentality was very rare and valuable. Oftentimes, people who wanted to grab something in one go would not be able to achieve anything. In the end, Dake called the polymorph over and turned it into a puppet. Then, he equipped it with the wood armor. Busy. The polymorph put on a little skirt and a little hat and shook its little butt on the table. However, the wooden skirt hung on its body and made clanking sounds. It didn't feel like a piece of clothing at all. Not only will this level of equipment not have the effect of increasing strength, but it will also cause negative effects. Dake pondered for a while and decided to seal it forever. The next day, Monday, Dake studied seriously for the whole day. He first went to the library to finish his homework. Then, he ate something and rushed back to the dorm. Last night's refinement did not dampen his interest. Instead, it made him even more interested. This time, he chose a large piece of wood and prepared to carefully carve a skirt that fit Ibu's size. From the blueprint to the completion of the carving, it took more than an hour. After that, he didn't directly use it for refinement. Instead, he took out a set of paint and began to paint. This was a response to last night's failure. He could think of 3 reasons why the armament refinement didn't work as expected. He couldn't solve the problem of using spirit force. He had no idea how to choose and add materials, so he could only start from the precision of the carving. The skirt he made last night was too rough. It didn't look like a real thing at all. This time, he wanted to make a skirt that was very similar to a skirt. In short, 2 hours later, he successfully made a pink wooden skirt, and even let Fairy Ibu try it on. The color was quite right, but the wooden skirt was stuck in her legs. Under Ibu's resentful gaze, Dake took off the wooden skirt and began the second armament refinement. After the first experience, the second armament refinement was obviously much faster than the previous day. Whether it was the pouring of the spirit furnace or the final smelting, he was more familiar with it. After a short hour, he completed the second armament refinement and obtained the second armament card. Since he only used a wooden skirt, the armament card, this time looked no different from the equipment card. However, the armament card and the equipment card were fundamentally different in practice. He picked up the final product and carefully observed it. The pink skirt on the card surface was obviously more textured than the wood armor skirt. This breakthrough gave him some better expectations for the results of this experiment. With a hint of anticipation, Dake injected a bit of magic. Then, information flowed into his head. He couldn't help but smile. Card name, Moonlight Skirt. Type, Item Card. Effect, Defense plus 23. Becomes more charming under the moonlight. From the wood armor to the moonlight skirt. This is a qualitative breakthrough. Just from the name of the card, one could see the huge breakthrough. As for the slight increase in defense, it wasn't that important. However, the additional effect was very good. For Ibu, who had the body of charm, this was probably one of the most suitable effects. Dake couldn't help but summon the moonlight skirt. As the light lit up, the pink skirt fell into his hands. When he touched it, he could clearly feel a kind of softness that was different from wood. However, the softness didn't seem to be enough. It lacked the finesse of the fabric. The most shocking part was the waistline. There was an elastic band there. Although Dake did deliberately carve the feeling of an elastic band, he didn't think that he would really succeed. It seems that at least my train of thought was correct. Dake's smile gradually widened. He then raised the skirt and observed it under the light of the magic lamp. At the same time, he also showed it to the surrounding magic elves. Everyone's gaze was attracted to the skirt. The little devil touched the hat on its head, suddenly feeling a kind of status threat. On the other hand, Meow Meow's eyes were shining. Its bright gaze kept jumping back and forth between the dress and the fat-head fish in its paws, giving off a feeling of eagerness. Of course, the most excited one was Ibu, who had just tried on the wooden skirt. Meow! It called out loudly. Its two antennae climbed onto Dake's wrist and gently exerted force. Doc came back to his senses and put down his hand. Then, he scooped up Ibu and pulled her into his embrace. He then turned her body around so that her belly was facing outwards, and rubbed her little belly. Meow! Ibu immediately let out a comfortable cry. Dake then picked up its tail and put the skirt on. He then grabbed its right leg and put it through the skirt. Next was the left leg. After both legs went through the skirt, he grabbed the skirt's waist and pulled it up to the waist. This way, this little pink skirt could be considered finished. Doc looked at it carefully and felt satisfied. He then placed Fairy Ibu on the ground. As soon as Ibu's hind legs touched the ground, it excitedly jumped and started to dance in circles. Heart suit, heart suit, heart suit. It then hummed the daily version of the bewitching voice, the bewitching song. In short, it was visible to the naked eye. After so many days, the king had finally returned. While Ibu was singing and dancing, it would occasionally steal glances at the surrounding magic elves. It found that they were all somewhat jealous, especially that hypocritical white cat, which was curled up on top of the cat tree like a pitiful orphan. There was also that fat stinky cow, which was completely useless apart from being able to produce milk. As expected, the most favored one was this fairy, Ibu. As it glanced, Ibu's gaze drifted to the little devil's head. Meow. Isn't it just a hat? Sooner or later, I'll get one too. Dake squinted his eyes and observed for a while. He then took out Ibu's magic card and observed the changes in its magic from the numerical value. Although this moonlight skirt was not very useful, it was still an armed card. Armed card and equipment card. Other than the difference in whether or not it needed to be worn, there was also a fundamental difference in the operating principle and mechanism. Simply put, equipment card was a foreign object. Armed card, on the other hand, was integrated with the user to a certain extent. For the same sword, if it was an equipment card, it could only be used in the hand. The attack bonus provided by the equipment had to be brought into play through the sword. But if the sword was an armed card, then the attack bonus provided by the sword would be used on the whole body, increasing the basic attack power of the user. It gave people the feeling that they had entered the one with the sword realm. It was the same when it was used on the armor. Equipment card was simply a piece of armor. Armed card, on the other hand, would enhance the whole body, just like a transformation. The main reason for this difference was the operating principle of the two. Equipment card generally had a time limit, but it could be used directly after being summoned. If the time limit was up, the time limit could be increased by replenishing the mana. Armed card, on the other hand, did not have a time limit because it needed to be filled with mana at all times. It was because of the large amount of mana that armed card could bring out powerful effects that equipment card could not. It was also because of the constant flow of mana that armed card could be closely connected to the user, achieving the effect of fusion or transformation. So everything had its pros and cons. Armed card looked good, but because it needed a large amount of mana to support it, it could not be popularized. If it was equipped on the magic fairy, its mana would be depleted quickly, and the mana of the magic fairy was equivalent to its life. So it was difficult to use armed card in an official duel. Archmages basically used armed card on themselves. And now, Dake had equipped Moonlight Dress on Fairy Ibu, so Fairy Ibu's mana was naturally depleted. But at the moment, it seemed that this loss of mana was still within an acceptable range. The reason was probably because the Moonlight Dress was too tight on the waist. This type of equipment that was more for viewing than battle did not have much value. This Moonlight Dress was not enough. 2 in 1 4,000 plus. Work until dawn. Chapter 327. In Paradise, Goddess Ibu's magic was constantly being replenished. However, the magic consumed by Moonlight Dress was enough to offset Paradise's recharge. It was clear that the armed card's magic consumption was indeed huge. Dake's original idea was to use Paradise's magic recovery to allow the magic elves to use the armed card for a long time. However, it seemed that Paradise version 1.0 was not enough to support them to use the armed card. Perhaps after the version upgrade, more magic elves would be added in and the magic recovery rate of Paradise would increase to a level where it could support the armed card as consumption. However, that was only a possibility that existed in his predictions. It's not optimistic. His magic elves had high intelligence that could accurately unleash the true power of the armed card. However, they were still stuck on the magic part. Under the current situation, even if he refined a suitable armed card, it could only be used for a short period of time. However, there was still time. There would be a way in the future. Website https://m Vipkanshu VIP. Dake began to think about the reason why this moonlight dress could achieve a breakthrough in the armed card crafting. On the surface, the more detailed carving and the later paint seemed to be the reason why moonlight dress succeeded. But in reality, a smart person was often good at thinking and discovering things. Dake did not think of himself as a smart person, but he felt that he was more or less a person who was good at thinking. Being able to calm down and think was actually a kind of talent. Perhaps wood carving, which required meticulous carving, was quite suitable for him. After thinking deeply, he noticed the difference between when he carved the moonlight dress and when he carved the wood armor. When carving wood armor, he was more or less in a perfunctory mood. He felt that this was enough, more or less, and it was enough. When carving moonlight dress, although the final product was not that exquisite, he had a clear goal when carving it. He wanted to give it to Goddess Ibu. He put in a lot of effort to make it suitable for it. In other words, it was heart. A more exquisite appearance and more heart. Which reason was more important? Putting it into the rules of this world, it was not that difficult to guess. Heart, magic, and armed card in one. So that's how it is. The soul here doesn't just refer to the soul furnace. Only by carving with your heart can you carve a truly good piece of work. This is actually the same as pursuing art. Perhaps in the future, I should choose an object that I like. For example, the holy garment, the great sin equipment, the digital armor. Speaking of digital armors, the Dilu beast seems to be able to use the radiant armor, and the armor can evolve into the Nephiadi beast. But how do we make those things? Dake shook his head, thinking that there was indeed a gap between dreams and reality. At this point in time, it was best to choose something simple and feasible to make. Perhaps it would be a good idea to make a suitable piece of equipment for every magic guide sprite. With this as the foundation, he could continuously accumulate proficiency points. He would wait until he had accumulated a certain level of proficiency before attempting more complicated operations. For example, putting materials other than self-made equipment into the mind furnace. It was obvious that there was a limit to simply using self-made equipment to smelt. Adding additional materials could give the equipment more effects and abilities. If he went one step further, perhaps he could wait until the end of the semester to go home and ask the developer of the Triad Equipment Refining Array. This was his unique advantage. Of course, it was impossible for him to not use it. Tuesday night. Dake returned to the dormitory earlier than yesterday. Then, under the expectant gazes of the magic guide sprites, he began to carve. No, before carving, he gave an assignment. Describe a piece of clothing that you like with the correct words, no less than 200 words. For any child who had learned how to write, this small essay of 100 words was a simple task. But for the magic guide sprites, it was a disaster. Only the Dilu beast, who often read picture books, could easily complete it. It was only 200 words, but the magic guide sprites spent an entire hour to hand in all the assignments. Among them, Trash Slime's assignment was written by myriad variations. Meow Meow was lucky to be exempted from homework because of its short learning time. But Dake still made it write down what it liked on a piece of paper. Just like that. After Dake collected the assignments, he had a rough understanding of the magic guide sprite's preferences in clothing. He graded all the assignments and then announced that he would start carving from the one with the highest score. The pure and naive elves were dumbstruck by this series of actions. They finally understood the importance of results and points. And of course, the one who got the full 100 points was the Dilu Beast. After taking back the assignment, the Dilu Beast stared at the bright red 100 points on the workbook. Its two big eyes couldn't help but curve into a crescent moon shape. It was describing a hat in the workbook. Buddha. After the little devil knew the Dilu Beast's goal, it was speechless for a long time. As for itself, it also wanted a hat. That's right, the little devil wanted a hat to increase its weight. As the saying goes, the mountain is not tall, as long as there is a hat, it will be alive. After confirming the goal, Dake began to carve tonight's equipment. The hat in the Dilu Beast's heart was a white, furry top hat with two different colored feathers on one side of the hat. This kind of hat was very difficult to carve, but after Dake grasped the basic technique, he just needed to spend a little more time to carve it. Because it was a hat given to the Dilu Beast. When he was carving, he poured his love for the Dilu Beast into the hat. The final product was not much different from yesterday's dress, but Dake felt that this hat was better. After carving, he slowly painted it and soon a white top hat was out of the oven. Dake rested for a while and then started the equipment refinement for tonight. The overall process was no different from the previous 2 days. Only when he was pouring the mind furnace did he use pride and not bliss. When he poured his mana into the equipment refinement, he found that his control over his mana was gradually increasing. In the end, he only drank a small bottle of mana recovery potion, and the refinement was almost complete. During the entire process, the Dilu Beast held on to the mana recovery potion and guarded by the side. Although it was expressionless, it still cared a lot about this hat. Dake concentrated on maintaining the output of his mana. When he was about to finish, he suddenly saw a paw appear in front of him. Then Meow Meow quietly approached and threw the fat-head fish carving into the mind furnace. Meow! In an instant. Before Dake could react, the Dilu Beast suddenly screamed and stared at Meow Meow like an evil spirit. The dormitory, which was originally quite harmonious, instantly turned into a battlefield of carnage. Meow Meow Meow. Meow Meow, who had done something bad, quickly climbed up the bookshelf and shook its head and tail without a care. The Dilu Beast suddenly became angry. Its right paw suddenly popped out and it opened its mouth to reveal a rare sharp canine tooth. If Dake hadn't pressed his hand on its head in time, the cat fist would have been fiercely swung out. However, Meow Meow didn't know that it had escaped death. It only stared at the mind furnace with excitement. It had obviously been planning this for a long time. This wave of sneaking in the wooden fish was definitely not a spontaneous idea. It was likely that Doc had ranked its equipment last, which was one of the reasons for this. In front of the experiment table, Dake only had time to press the Dilu Beast's head before he quickly turned his attention back to the refinement array. The fat-head fish carving that Meow Meow suddenly threw in caused a big problem in the refinement process. In order to stabilize the refinement array, Dake hurriedly poured in his mana. However, the mind furnace already showed signs of instability. In a hurry, he didn't have time to think and directly dipped a little bit of pride into the mind furnace again. Fortunately, with the addition of pride, the mind furnace stabilized again. Only then did Doc heave a sigh of relief and concentrate on smelting the wooden fish. However, his heart was still hanging high. Triad armament refinement required a magus to personally make the clothes, and that wooden fish was Meow Meow's creation. This went against the theoretical basis of the triad armament refinement. However, if it could be refined like this, it would open up new ideas. At this moment, Dake suddenly caught a glimmer of inspiration that he couldn't think of before. Therefore, he put more effort into it. More than 10 minutes later, Dake looked at the armament card, lying quietly on the table, and couldn't help but feel excited. This armament card was actually completed. Sure enough, in the theory of Magi, the magic fairy is a part of the magus. It's not an independent entity. This is the same theory as the flicker spell. In theory, the flicker spell is a spell that can only be used on oneself, but in reality, it can be used on the magic fairy refined by one's own magic. This triad armament refinement, seems to be based on the same principle. Meow Meow's wooden carving is equivalent to me using magic to make a wooden carving. In other words, it's a wooden carving made by me. This is really a pleasant surprise. The more Dake thought about it, the more excited he became. With the technique expert characteristic, Meow Meow's talent in carving was much higher than his. Although he could now make a simple wooden carving to try refining it, what he really wanted in his heart wasn't something so simple. Whether it was the Holy Cloth, Gundam, Mask Knight, or something else, they all required extremely high craftsmanship. And he couldn't spend too much time on carving. When the time came, he hoped that Meow Meow could take over the heavy responsibility. No, I have to hold back my laughter. Dake quickly pulled a long face. The current situation wasn't the time to laugh. Meow Meow had just made a mistake, and the Dilu beast was still angry. As the head of the family, he had to be clear about rewards and punishments. Fortunately, this armed card didn't fail, and the Dilu beast's hat was still there. As for Meow Meow's fat head fish wood carving, it was still there. Dake looked at the armed card, and thought that Meow Meow's talent in carving was indeed much better than his. On the face of the card, there was a lifelike fat head fish swimming around the top hat. It was hard to imagine that it was originally just a piece of wood. These two wooden carvings were perfectly fused together. But this armed card ultimately belonged to the Dilu beast. Meow Meow threw its beloved fish into the spiritual furnace, but it was destined not to get it. He really didn't know what it was after. Dake shook his head slightly and injected magic to further examine the armed card. Card name, White Fish Hat. Type, Item card. Effect, Defense plus 63, able to absorb sunlight and transform it into magic. Solar Charging Hat. Compared to the wood armor's attracting moonlight, and the moonlight skirt's increasing charm, the White Fish Hat's sunlight replenishing magic was simply a godly skill. Dake's eyelids trembled slightly. This was really a pleasant surprise. For the magic elf, there was probably no better effect than replenishing magic. He just didn't know how efficient the sunlight was at converting into magic. Could it offset the consumption of the armed card? Could it further offset the magic loss of the magic elf? If it was possible, well, this should be difficult to do. But at least it's a research direction. After Dake seriously recorded it, he turned around and looked at the Dilu beast with a hint of joy. He summoned the White Fish Hat, and gently put it on the Dilu beast's head. The Dilu beast subconsciously reached out and grabbed the hat. It slightly raised its head and looked at him with tears in its eyes. Meow. Meow Meow on the bookshelf meowed in dissatisfaction. Its claws were restless as if it wanted to pounce over and snatch the hat. But after carefully measuring the difference in strength between the two sides, it revealed a dejected expression and withered away. After getting the White Fish Hat, the Dilu beast finally calmed down. It wasn't as ostentatious as Ivan the Fairy. It just swayed in front of the mirror and then sat on the bed. It held the hat and looked at it repeatedly. It was especially fond of the little fish. Meow Meow bared its fangs. Dake observed the reactions of the magic elf and thought about how to educate Meow Meow. But as he thought about it, his eyes gradually fixed on the White Fish Hat. A new idea suddenly popped up in his mind. The magic elf's use of magic is basically based on their killing moves. If they don't use their killing moves, they won't be able to use magic very well. Like little Ivan, they don't even know how to use a magic pen. But if they wear the armed card, even if they don't control it, their magic will be absorbed by the armed card. If they carefully feel it at this time, it shouldn't be difficult to develop an understanding of magic. After understanding, its control. These simple, armed cards might be a very good teaching tool. 2 in 1 4000 plus. Chapter 328. With this thought in mind, Dake didn't bother with Meow Meow for the time being. Instead, he called the Diru beast over and explained in detail. The Diru beast raised its head and listened very seriously. After it understood, it immediately hugged the White Fish Hat and carefully sensed it. Among all of Dake's magic guiding fairies, the Diru beast's comprehension ability was second to none. If even it couldn't do it, then this idea could only remain a fantasy. Meow. Fairy Ibu, who had been listening all this time, expressed its dissatisfaction. Dake grabbed its paws and pinched it, then summoned its little skirt. With a flash of light, the pink moonlight skirt appeared around Fairy Ibu's waist. Fairy Ibu proudly twisted it, then imitated the Diru beast and carefully sensed the skirt. The other magic guiding fairies revealed envious gazes. Remember the URL? Vip Kanchu. VIP Doc blinked his eyes and tried to persuade her. Do your best. If you can grasp the control and output of magic, based on the principle that magisters and magic guiding fairies are of the same body, you should be able to directly use the magic guiding cards I made. When the time comes, you can rely on yourself to change. Thus, Fairy Ibu and the Diru beast became even more serious. After dealing with this, Dake began to turn to Meow Meow. He sat down in front of the table, patted his knee, and said to Meow Meow, "Come here." Although Meow Meow was extremely unwilling, the Magister's orders were coercive to the magic guiding fairies. Even if it was extremely unwilling, its body could only obey. Not long after, Meow Meow jumped down from the counter and climbed onto Dake's knee. Dake let it sit on his knee, then grabbed its two paws and said seriously, "Do you know your mistake?" Meow Meow shook its head vigorously, deliberately glancing at the surrounding magic guiding fairies who were curiously watching from the corner of its eyes. Its meaning was, "Can we change the place to talk?" Meow, you don't want face? Dake couldn't help but laugh. If you really want face, can't you use your brain before doing something? But on the other hand, he was rather helpless. Meow Meow was the embodiment of greed. Greed was its nature. It could only be restrained, but not cured. If he wanted to restrain its personality, he was afraid that he would need more moral education. In fact, Dake didn't have much time to teach it moral education. Because it didn't log into paradise, it could only come out of the dormitory at night. This difference created a barrier between it and the other magic guiding fairies. In the education of children, being different was actually a very important point to pay attention to. It was very easy for children to become isolated. Therefore, many parents would try their best to let their children have a similar environment as the children of other families. Even if the family's conditions were somewhat difficult, they had to scrimp and save for the best for their children. Dake didn't know how to comment on this behavior, but ever since he had paradise, he found that he could more or less understand this kind of thinking. For example, he had been thinking of ways to allow the magic guide fairies to not be confined to the dormitory and to be able to go out freely. He also taught Evie and Meow Meow how to carve wood. As for the other basic education, there was no need to talk about it. Up until now, every weekend, they had been constantly buying all kinds of things that they needed. If only I could let the magic guide fairies enter the school. Suddenly, an extremely absurd idea appeared in Dake's mind. He hurriedly stopped and told himself that it was time to educate Meow Meow. Thus, he thought for a moment and told Meow Meow a story about the little monkey picks peaches. The little monkey went down the mountain to pick peaches. After picking peaches, it saw corn, so it threw peaches and broke corn. After breaking corn, it saw watermelon, so it threw corn to pick watermelon. After picking watermelon, it saw a rabbit, so it threw watermelon to catch the rabbit. In the end, the rabbit ran away and didn't even catch a trace of it, but the sky turned dark. The little monkey played around for a long time and came up empty-handed. After telling the story, Dake asked expectantly, "Did you hear anything from this story?" Meow Meow just shook its head. Meow. Dake sighed and said, "This is to tell you not to be like the little monkey. No principles, no satisfaction, and in the end, it's all for nothing. No matter when or where, you can't be blinded by your greed." Meow Meow, meow, but I'm a cat. Dake's face turned ugly. Although he didn't understand Meow Meow's words, he could tell from its expression that it wasn't remorseful at all. "Hey." The little fiend stuck its head out from the board above the table and, translated, "It wants to say that it can definitely catch the rabbit. As for the peaches, corn, watermelon, and so on, it won't throw them away either. Hee, holding the peaches, corn, and watermelon to catch the rabbit. Hee, meow meow, meow. You're spreading rumors. Seeing that Meow Meow's feet were starting to exert strength, Dake reached out and pressed down on its shoulder. It seems that reasoning doesn't work sometimes. He took a deep breath and changed his way of thinking. Meow meow, you don't have a little red flower yet, do you? Meow. Meow Meow shook its head and couldn't help but widen its eyes. Although it didn't know what a little red flower could be used for, it certainly wanted one since other magic elves had one. Dake, however, said, "Then I'll mark it down for you. -10 flowers." Meow meow, meow. Dake didn't look at the deformed cat face. Instead, he took some scraps from the table and quickly engraved the word mischievous on it and tied it with a string. Then he showed the wooden sign to Meow Meow. "Do you know what this word is?" Meow. Meow Meow shook its head. It was just a beginner. Dake smiled. "It's okay. You'll know soon enough." Saying that, he hung the wooden sign around Meow Meow's neck. "Every night when I summon you, remember to wear it properly. When you understand one day, I'll take it off for you." Meow. Meow Meow was confused, but it had to obey its master's orders. It raised its hand to grab the wooden sign and looked in the direction of the other magic elves. Suddenly, it noticed that the milk can was also looking at it. Moo, the milk can shook the silver sign around its neck, indicating that it had one too. Meow Meow's eyes couldn't help but look back and forth between the silver sign and its own wooden sign. An ominous feeling finally sprouted in its little heart. The so-called education in entertainment. The meaning was that education should be placed in entertainment. In any case, whether or not Meow Meow was entertained was unknown, but the other magic elves were definitely entertained. After finishing this, Dake began to deal with the remnants of the experiment and make a summary. Although there were a lot of accidents tonight, the harvest was quite bountiful. Not only did he refine the white fish hat with guidance, but he also found a way to teach magic elves how to control magic. Most importantly, he confirmed the theory that magisters and magic elves were homologues. This theory was of limited use to other archmages. But for Dake, it was an extremely important theory. With this as a foundation, he could do a lot of things. In the dead of night, Dake was already sitting on the bed. Because he had been busy with armament refinement, he hadn't practiced underworld spirit for several days in a row. No matter what, he couldn't fall behind tonight. But it was different from the past. Tonight, he had two more magic elves by his side who were imitating him. Fairy Ibu and the Dilu beast were also in the same posture. One person and two pets were like the trinity of the Triad Armament Refinement Array. But by the time Dake finished practicing, Fairy Ibu and the Dilu beast hadn't successfully cultivated their understanding of magic. After carefully asking and confirming that they had more or less found a little feeling, Dake heaved a sigh of relief. As long as there were signs, it was good. It was unrealistic to expect them to succeed in such a short period of time. In the blink of an eye, the moon set and the sun rose. On Wednesday afternoon, Dake wanted to work overtime and make two more pieces of equipment, but just as he brought the Dilu beast to the balcony to do the white fish hat solar charging test, he received a message from Professor Shi Erfu. Helpless, he could only put down the matter at hand for the time being and rush to Professor Shi Erfu's office. As for the test results of the white fish hat, sure enough, it was as expected. It was true that it could absorb sunlight and convert it into magic power. However, when the sun was at its peak at noon, the efficiency was only about 1 point per second. Not to mention replenishing the consumption of the armor, it could not even fill the gap between a fingernail. It was completely equivalent to nothing. This meant that he would probably have to refine the golden, white fish hat to be able to achieve the effect Dake wanted. In the end, what is the essence of equipment? Are there materials that can spontaneously produce magic? If I use those materials to make equipment, can it make up for the consumption? Dake thought all the way and soon arrived in front of Professor Shi Erfu's office. He more or less guessed the purpose of Professor Shi Erfu's summons. Sure enough, after pushing open the door, he saw the calm and unruffled Professor Ka Zaire. The two of them hadn't seen each other for a long time and were playing magic chess again. But when they saw Dake come in, they stopped. Looking at the chessboard, they should have just started. Professor Ka Zaire waved at him. "You're here." Dake nodded and closed the door behind him. Professor Shi Erfu said, "Good afternoon, Dimming." Dake said, "Good afternoon, Professor." Professor Shi Erfu seemed quite relaxed. "Do you know why we called you here?" Dake smiled. "Is there a problem with the design of the access card?" "I told you that you would have guessed it," Professor Ka Zaire said with a smile. "Actually, we want to hear more of your opinions. I already have a prototype here. Come and take a look." Saying that, he took out a magic card from his card bag and handed it over. Dake took the magic card and observed it carefully. The first impression that the magic card gave him was very similar to the branch card, but it clearly didn't have the overly heavy feeling of the branch card. Obviously, there was still a gap between the access card and the branch card in terms of craftsmanship. Professor Ka Zaire said, "The main function of this access card is the same as last time. It borrows part of the design of the branch card and can receive notifications from the school. Also, it's estimated that there will be a semi-finished product first, which will be activated by the students with magic power. This way, it can be guaranteed that it's a real name system. Also, the escape device has been installed, but the secret passage is different from the underground city. It can't guarantee that the escape device will work normally. I'll leave a hole in the barrier at the entrance of the secret passage so that it can be connected to the access card. You can use the access card to open the seal temporarily." Dake tried to inject magic power into the card, but he didn't get any feedback. It seemed that the access card was already in the shape of Professor Ka Zaire. After returning the access card to the professor, he asked in confusion, "Isn't this quite thoughtful?" Professor Ka Zaire said solemnly, "Is there anything else you want to add? After all, this is going to be officially promoted in the school. We have to be cautious." Dake thought for a moment and sat down on the sofa. Then, he said thoughtfully, "Speaking of which, I've always had a question. Since our branch card can receive notifications from the school, why can't it have a function to send messages to the school? This way, it'll be convenient for us to ask for help when we're in danger." "That's a good question." Professor Ka Zaire sighed. "Unfortunately, the branch card is just a receiver. The reason why we can send messages to the students in the school is because of the barrier above our heads." Dake couldn't help but raise his head in surprise. This was very different from what he had imagined. Professor Ka Zaire smiled. "Why else do you think your credits would be deducted just because we said a few words? The Shang-Malian barrier isn't simple." Dake couldn't help but laugh dryly when he remembered that he could also add or subtract credits at will when he was a substitute teacher. It was easy for people to overlook the big environment they were in. He had clearly seen how powerful the barrier was, but he had never paid attention to it. The Shang-Malian barrier was like a large net. Not only did it protect the castle from outside invasion, but it also provided convenience for the students' daily lives. Wait, a large net? Dake suddenly had an idea. He thought of a word, the internet. He couldn't help but ask, but why can the words of a professor be transmitted to the student's branch card? Is it purely because you're a professor? Professor Ka Zaire couldn't help but ponder. "I really didn't think about it. Maybe it's because we have verified our identities?" Dake shook his head and said, "I'm not too sure how a professor verifies their identity. But in fact, when I was a substitute teacher in the arithmetic class, I exercised my rights as a professor. Since the barrier can do this, there's no reason why it can't let the branch card receive messages from the students. Could it be that there are too many students and they're worried that they can't handle it?" Professor Ka Zaire hesitated. "We'll have to ask the principal about this." Dake's mind couldn't help but turn. If it was because there were too many students, wouldn't a limited number of people be a very good identity verification? Only those who had the access card could transmit messages between the access cards. If there was such a privilege, the access card would definitely attract more people to fight for it. Also, Since it was the access card for the secret passage, it had to have a function. Dake said, "Let's not talk about the transmission problem first. I think the map problem is more important. 1,000,000 words. I hope that the big fans of books can set up an automatic subscription. You can't be fooled, you can't lose out. Thank you for subscribing every day." Chapter 329. The paths in the secret tunnel were intertwined and the terrain was complicated. Occasionally, the terrain would change. A map system that could automatically record and adjust the terrain was very important. Moreover, the school card already had a map system, which meant that this idea could be realized. But after Dake suggested it, Professor Zayer shook his head. A normal map system can do it, but automatic recording and adjustment is very difficult to do. Generally, we need to rely on the magisters to record and adjust the map themselves. Dake thought for a moment. That's enough. But since we intend to make the card into a symbol of status, we should at least have a grading system. Professor Zayer was surprised. A grading system? Dake said, yes, just like the white, blue, purple, orange, and gold grades of the card. The higher the grade of the card, the more privileges it has. For example, the number of times you can enter the secret tunnel will increase, or you can bring people in. That's a good idea. Let me think. Professor Zayer was moved. He felt that Dake's idea was very broad and very useful. They then chatted for a while and talked about the issue of the card distribution. The card could be given out as a reward for various activities and competitions. It could even be used as an end-of-term reward. Also, to increase the value of the card. Remember, https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP Dark suggested that some treasures could be placed in the secret passageway, just like the treasure maps of the hero and the Valkyrie. Not only could it be used as a trial for the students, it could also guide them to understand the secret passageway and gradually develop its uses. He felt that it was a pity for the school not to make good use of such a treasure. But these were all points for future development. As for the first competition to promote the card, it was tentatively scheduled to be on Easter. There was already a holiday on Easter, so it was a good time to have an Easter duel ceremony. The card would be given out as an Easter egg. But this year's Easter is actually on the same day as April Fool's Day? Then there's still a whole month left. After Dake left the office, he started to think about it. Of course, he had his eyes on the card, but the chances of getting it from the third year were too low. But when he thought about it, not many people knew much about the secret passageway. Perhaps there would be fewer people participating in the Easter festival than he imagined. Maybe he could steal a chicken in front of a bunch of senior brothers and sisters who were just here for fun? In short, the idea was good. As for what the reality was, they could only wait and see. During the astronomy class that night, Professor Mitya continued to lecture as if nothing had happened. She could always poke at the middle school students' weak points, and the whole class was full of climaxes. After the astronomy class, Dake didn't have time to refine equipment. But tonight was the last day of February, so it was just the right time to make a conclusion. After Dake returned to the dormitory, he took out a pen and paper. He jotted down the number of major sins in his notebook. The summary at the end of each month could be compared to the previous month. Before he started writing, he thought for a moment and summoned Meow Meow. Then, he put the tag of mischievous egg on its neck. It is the father's fault for not teaching. If the teacher is not strict enough, the teacher will be lazy. Meow Meow was a typical example of evil by nature. Its early education had to be strict so that it would know pain. For the sake of its future, Dake could only harden his heart and become an evil person. Meow. Meow Meow shook its head vigorously at Dake. Last night, it flipped through the dictionary for a long time and finally found the words engraved on the wooden tag. After that, it was very repulsed. But this showed the effectiveness of this method. He had to let it develop a correct view of right and wrong. At least a week. No, 3 days. Dake silently shortened the punishment period. After that, he gave Meow Meow homework and opened the system panel to make a summary. He compared it to the end of last month. Pride, 104-102, envy, 38-38, rage, 85-84, sloth, 64-63, greed, 198, gluttony, 69-70, bliss, 109-103. With this comparison, Dake suddenly realized something. Am I already so self-disciplined now? He tapped his head and couldn't help but feel a little troubled. In February, he drew 3 points of pride, 4, 5 points of greed, and 5 points of bliss. In theory, pride should have fallen to 101 points, greed to 95, 5 points, and bliss to 101, 5 points. Under Dark's intentional or unintentional guidance, these numbers rose slightly. But the numbers didn't rise by much. In the end, the overall number decreased by a lot. This showed that he was really restrained this month. Even Valentine's Day didn't evoke his desire too much. Pride, greed, and bliss increased, but it was too little. If this continues, I'm afraid I'll have to find a way to actively release my desire to draw great sins in the future. Unless Soul Loss Curse can be improved further and lower the standard draw line. He thought about the predicament when he first entered the school and his current situation. Every dog has its day. Dake shook his head and threw this thought to the back of his mind for the time being. He planned carefully. Until today, he still had a lot of great sins in his hands. Among them, pride had 8 points left. Bliss had 3 points left. Greed had 5 points left. Of course, this was just an approximate number. The actual value wouldn't be so precise. As for the remaining core materials that could be used, they were 1. Dragon's Reverse Scale, 2. Blessing of the Wind Spirit, 3. 7-star coins, 4. Soul Powder, Vlad. The skills that he hadn't mastered were Zoo, Killer Skill, Transformation, and Love Magic Circle. In addition, Triad Armament Refining also needed to be further studied. Just by doing a little calculation, Dake knew that his upcoming study life would still be very fulfilling. In March, I should think about how to improve the card deck strength. It seems like I did a lot in February, but in fact, only Meow Meow can improve. And although the Easter Duel Festival is somewhat entertaining, it's still an official competition after all. It requires 40 magic cards. And I don't have 40 high-quality magic cards that can be used. Now that I think about it, among Pride, Bliss, and Greed, only Greed doesn't have a level 3 card. It's time to make a Greed 3. But making Greed 3 requires 10 points of Greed. Based on the calculation of 5 points per drop, that's at least 7 drops. So, I'm only left with 3 drops. 3 drops means 5 points of Great Sins. If I use these 5 points of Great Sins on Pride, with the remaining 8 points, I'll be able to cultivate a Fruit of Pride. The 3 points of Bliss stored can also cultivate a Fruit of Bliss. This way, I can cultivate 2 new magic fairies. But among the core materials that I have, Blessing of the Wind Spirit and 7-star coins can't be used at the moment. So, only Dragon's Reverse Scale and Soul Powder are left. Fruit of Pride, Fruit of Bliss, Dragon's Reverse Scale, Soul Powder, Catgrass, Foxgrass, Cowgrass. Difficult. Dake couldn't help but frown. He really didn't know what to do. Dragon's Reverse Scale was obviously a top-grade material for refining a dragon pet. He might even be able to refine a 5-star or 6-star magic fairy. However, Catgrass Flower and Wood Shop didn't have any suitable catgrass for a dragon pet. Wait, isn't there a goldfish grass? Can it be used with Dragon's Reverse Scale to refine a Carp King that can evolve into a violent carp dragon? But Carp King is a carp, right? Can goldfish grass work? And violent carp dragon should need wrath. Then what about ugliness fish that can evolve into minus? It should be a magic fairy that has a high compatibility with bliss. But what kind of fish is ugliness fish? Could it be a carp too? So, goldfish doesn't have fish rights? If it's a horned goldfish, it'll be a huge loss. So, I should think about it at length. I still want to use this dragon's reverse scale to refine an orthodox dragon magic fairy. For example, something like blue-eyed white dragon or little fire dragon would work too. But that would definitely require dragon grass or lizard grass, a type of cat grass. Most importantly, this dragon's reverse scale was the first gift that Senior Panduola had given him. He didn't want to use it so easily. However, if he didn't use the dragon's reverse scale, then only soul powder was left to use. However, this soul powder wasn't very useful either. For example, this type of soul powder usually has two attributes. One is related to its main body, vampire, and the other is soul. If it's a vampire attribute, it should be bliss and bat grass that are compatible with it. If it's a soul, I can think of ghost sea that can evolve into gung-gui. But what does ghost sea need? Greed and gas grass? Or Doran Messiah that has both dragon and ghost attributes? Or I can take a big gamble and use the basic refining method to process that bottle of soul powder? I might be able to refine another little devil beast. Thinking of this, Dake couldn't help but glance at the little devil beast hanging upside down on the bird rack. Then he noticed that the little devil beast was looking down at Meow Meow, who was lying on the small table doing homework with a mocking gaze. He didn't care too much and turned back to continue thinking. As a result, the more he thought about it, the more restless he became. Of course, this was actually a burst of gambler's mentality. However, Dake already had the experience of refining kettle pot, trash slime, wrestling hawkman, and ball sea lion. Although the three magic guide spirits other than kettle pot didn't have the strength of the other magic guide spirits, in fact, they were already quite good. Moreover, in his heart, he was actually not at ease with Vlad's soul powder. There was a kind of, why don't I just waste it, thought. Using that bottle of soul powder, and adding a little bliss, without limiting the range, relying entirely on randomness, I wonder what I can refine? I'm a little looking forward to it. After finally knocking out the usage of a material, Dake temporarily put down the pen and paper and used the last bit of time tonight to go behind Meow Meow. Meow Meow never played tricks only when it was learning to read and carve. It worked hard on reading because it was smart enough. It worked hard on carving because it liked it. In short, there was something pleasing about its personality. Dake remembered that he hadn't taught it much personally, so he taught it a lesson tonight. At about 10:30, he finished the lesson and turned around to wash up in the bathroom. After washing up, he got into bed, picked up the cat grass in the small basket at the bedside, and held it in his arms. But halfway through, he found that Meow Meow, who had finished his homework, stuck to him with an eager face. Dake looked at it with a puzzled expression. Although Meow Meow could walk on 2 feet, its habits were more like that of a cat, and it usually walked on all 4s. But at this moment, Meow Meow was walking on 2 feet, and its front paws were hidden behind its back. Meow. Meow Meow obediently stopped at the bedside and looked up at him. Dake sighed, put the cat grass aside, and carried Meow Meow to the bed. He touched Meow Meow's gold coin and said, "Tell me, what do you want?" Meow Meow first pulled the mischievous wooden sign around its neck, then put its left hand, which had been hidden behind its back all this time, in front of Dake and spread its paws. He saw a round bead hidden in that soft and tender meat pad. What's this? At first, Dake didn't understand. But after a moment, he suddenly understood. He was pleasantly surprised. Treasure-gathering art? Meow. Meow Meow nodded vigorously. Then it raised the wooden sign around its neck again. It's bargaining. Dake couldn't help but laugh. He had originally decided to punish it for 3 days, and today was the second night, so there was only one night left. But Meow Meow didn't know. It seemed that Meow Meow really wanted to throw the sign away. Dake rubbed its head and asked, "Do you know where you went wrong now?" For the incarnation of greed to hand over its treasure, Meow Meow had to have gone through an internal struggle. If it could feel ashamed, it would be the beginning of admitting its mistake. As expected, Meow Meow nodded again, then pressed the bead into Dake's palm. Was this a show of sincerity? Dake thought for a moment, then picked up the bead and looked at it carefully. The additional effect of the treasure-gathering art, wealth-gathering art, was like a miracle. The bead that Meow Meow had summoned was a deep purple, like a jade bead, round and flawless, with divine light flowing inside. Just by holding it in his palm, it felt strangely sticky. Dake turned his palm upside down, and the bead was sucked into his palm and didn't fall. This bead, 2-in-14/100+, in the next 3 days, you'll see a cover somewhere. Don't ask. If you do, you'll see the Valkyrie. Chapter 330. If you know you're wrong, you have to change, okay? Dake solemnly took off the wooden sign hanging around Meow Meow's neck and put it aside. Then, the cat Grass picked up the wooden sign and put it back into the basket. Meow Meow glanced at it and suddenly reached its paw into the basket. It took the wooden sign engraved with "Mischievous Egg" and hid it behind its back. Dake witnessed the whole process and couldn't help but be stunned. After Meow Meow put the wooden sign into its small cabinet like it was a treasure, Dake put it back into the magic card. Then, he lay on the bed and used 2 fingers to hold the dark purple bead. He looked at the ceiling and carefully observed it. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly used some force and the flowing light in the bead became slightly brighter for a moment. This trace of brightness allowed him to gradually understand the magical use of the bead. First website, https://m, Vipkanchu. VIP. However, he didn't have any impression of similar objects. Last time, the 7-star coin was somewhat traceable, but this time, the bead was completely untraceable. Under normal circumstances, unless he was lucky enough to find the corresponding information in the library, it would be easier to get the answer by asking the professors. However, it wasn't good to rely on the professors, so Dake planned to go to the library tomorrow to do some research. The first day of March started with arithmetic class. Dake received a private notice from Professor Li at 6:30 in the morning. Dake strongly condemned the use of the branch card for personal gain. However, he still went to Professor Li's office at 6:50 in the morning. "Good morning, Professor Li." Dake opened the door and saw a floor full of teaching materials. Professor Li put his hands on his hips and looked at him proudly. "How is it? My teaching materials are pretty good, right? I listened to you and changed the name to Mathematics I. The knowledge of numbers, mathematics, not poking a needle." Dake picked up Mathematics I and flipped through it. He found that the content was better than he expected. Not only was there no problem with the typography, but most of the chapters were even accompanied by very cute illustrations. At first glance, it was obvious that this was not Professor Li's handiwork. Dake asked casually, "Professor, have you asked for help?" Professor Li's expression suddenly froze, and his gaze became erratic. Dake added, "He did a pretty good job. He must be a meticulous professor, right?" Professor Li smiled awkwardly and said, "It's Professor Bacon, who's in charge of second-year arithmetic. She heard from the students about what we're teaching, so she came to ask for cooperation. She hopes that we can allow her to use our teaching materials." Professor Bacon? Dake scratched his head, but he couldn't remember a professor who gave off the impression of bacon. However, Lu Zhou's original intention in writing this textbook was to popularize it. Therefore, he had no objections to Professor Bacon's participation. However, Professor Li's obvious method of transferring work to laziness made him feel quite helpless. However, a forced melon was not sweet. Professor Bacon, who took the initiative to insert herself into the teaching materials, was the most meticulous. Therefore, all in all, it was a win-win situation. Professor Lily saw that Lu Zhou was a little confused, so he said, "Professor Bacon is surprisingly a good person. Do you want me to introduce you to her? Like organizing a mathematics tea party?" Dake smiled and said, "That's not necessary. When the time comes, just say thank you to her for me." Huh? Professor Lily was puzzled. She's the one benefiting, why are we thanking her? Dake smiled and didn't say anything. It was almost time for class. Dake summoned Meow Meow and asked it to help carry the teaching materials from the two departments to the classroom. Professor Lily also summoned a sturdy and pretty enchantress to help. The two people and their pets carried the teaching materials all the way to the classroom. When they arrived at the classroom, it was already full of people. Professor Lily used her authority as a professor and asked a few boys to help her. She then distributed mathematics I to them. The students enjoyed the joy of finally having teaching materials. Some of them were even moved to tears. Then, Professor Lily began to talk about simple geometry. This class was mainly about the Pythagorean theorem, which was the Pythagorean theorem. People who were new to the Pythagorean theorem would usually think that it was magical. In fact, it was indeed magical. The students learned with relish. They felt like they were learning magic. However, they didn't realize that magic was extremely difficult to learn. In this regard, mathematics was the same. After the mathematics class, there was a break. Dake clearly felt that the atmosphere had changed. It seemed like the March issue made the little mages suddenly realize that White Mantis Day was coming. Regardless of whether it was a boy or a girl, they couldn't help but feel nervous. As for why they were nervous, who could say for sure? Maybe it was because they were expecting a response. Maybe it was because they didn't want their friends to leave the group because they found their other half. Maybe it was because they didn't want their crush to get a response or to give a response to someone else. In short, there were more reasons than most people thought. Dake was in the middle of it and couldn't help but feel annoyed. The 2-day setting of Valentine's Day and White Mantis Day was good, but it was very unfriendly to the people who were given chocolates on Valentine's Day. If the two parties were more than friends but not lovers, then the trouble would be even greater. Depending on your response, it could cause the original friendship to collapse. Dake was in this dilemma. However, if he thought about it carefully, the atmosphere when Panduola, Luo Si, and Professor Lily gave chocolates on Valentine's Day was actually quite casual. It wasn't a romantic atmosphere. The Valentine's Day they spent in the snow had a kind of ordinary and natural feeling. It was as if they skipped the romance and quickly entered the state of living together. In reality, this might not be the case. However, it did feel that way at the time. Therefore, Dake was prepared to be casual. Just treat it as a way to improve our relationship. He originally didn't want to respond. However, it was impolite not to reciprocate. In the end, he was prepared to put on a show. After the second class in the morning, Introduction to Magic, ended, Dake went straight to the library. He tried to rely on himself to find information about the orb. The search keywords were orb, shock absorption, and purple. However, in such a large library, it was too difficult to rely on such a small amount of information to find the target's information. In the end, he slapped his head and decided to ask Senior Panduola. However, the person on duty at noon was Ms. Bella. Ms. Bella was a slightly chubby middle-aged woman. She looked very amiable and made people unconsciously feel close to her. Dake and Ms. Bella's communication was limited, so after asking Panduola that she wasn't on duty at noon, he prepared to leave. However, Ms. Bella waved at him and took out a stool from under the cabinet, indicating for him to sit down. Although Dake was surprised, he sat down obediently. Ms. Bella said kindly, "Dimming, you're 12 years old this year, right?" Dake nodded. "Yes, ma'am. My birthday is in June." Ms. Bella suddenly said, "Then there's a difference of 3 years." Dake. Ms. Bella asked again, "You don't have a marriage contract, right?" Dake couldn't help but open his mouth, but he didn't say anything for a long time. Of course, it wasn't because he didn't want to say it, but because he wasn't sure himself. In theory, he had a fiancée. After all, she was the most popular female character in the original game. However, in his memory, he didn't have a marriage contract. Therefore, when he thought about this problem, he wondered if the marriage contract was set after this. When he first entered the school, he had pinned his hopes of happiness on his unknown fiancée. However, the current him didn't care much about his unknown fiancée. If he could naturally develop a relationship with one of the girls in the school who liked him, he would probably be satisfied. Dake dimming. Although greed had been increasing, he wasn't a greedy person. At this moment, he gave an honest answer. Dake shook his head and said, "Ms. Bella, you should know that nobles sometimes marry for various reasons. Although I don't know, I can't be sure that I don't have a fiancé." "Is that so?" Ms. Bella sighed in disappointment. However, she didn't let Dake go. Instead, she continued to ask, "What do you think of the current marriage system?" Marriage system? Dake couldn't help but feel confused. Ms. Bella then added, "In other words, polygamy." Dake finally understood. In this world, because too many men died on the battlefield in the early stages of the war, the ratio of men to women was severely imbalanced. Therefore, polygamy was created. However, later on, women also entered the battlefield. Because of the previous trend of having more men than women, the ratio of men to women gradually returned to a more normal level. Polygamy was also gradually outlawed at this time. However, that wasn't completely the case. Whether it was the commoners or the nobles, it was harder for them to marry more women. They needed to go to the church to repent and then pay a large amount of repentance before they could have the right to marry more than one woman. However, the nobles above the rank of count didn't have this concern. To be more precise, only the counts and the nobles above the rank of count could have the privilege of polygamy. However, this so-called polygamy was actually a system of one man with many concubines. Only the one and only wife could be called the noble lady in formal occasions and have the right to inherit the title. There was also the equal wife, which was a compromise between the noble lady and the concubine. Her status was higher than the concubine, but lower than the noble lady. However, the equal wife wasn't actually recognized by the law. Of course, this privilege of the nobles was currently being resisted. As the status of women gradually rose, there would be more and more social phenomena like this. Ms. Bella, obviously, raised this question under such circumstances. However, Dake actually had a nonchalant attitude towards this. He more or less had the mentality of going with the flow. Of course, it was also because he didn't have the spare energy to think about those issues that had nothing to do with him. Therefore, he replied at this time, "Time will tell us the answer." Ms. Bella was disappointed again. She definitely hoped that Dake was a staunch supporter of monogamy. In other words, she hoped that Dake was a person who was faithful. At this time, Dake had already guessed Ms. Bella's thoughts. He could have catered to her and made her feel satisfied, but he didn't do so. It was meaningless. Dake Dimeng didn't need to sugarcoat himself to this extent. The conversation between Dake and Ms. Bella ended here. He slightly took this conversation to heart, but that was it. In the following magic history class, Professor Ryan Hicks finally talked about his historical battles again. Dake listened very carefully and forgot about the conversation with Ms. Bella. After class, he packed up his things and went straight to Professor Ka Zayer's office and knocked on the door. Knock, knock, knock. "Come in." Dake opened the door and went in, then closed the door behind him. Professor Ka Zayer was making changes to the door card, and he looked very busy. In order not to disturb the professor, he went straight to the point. He took out the purple bead and asked, "Professor, do you know what this is?" Professor Ka Zayer took the bead and carefully observed it. The more he looked, the more surprised he became. He couldn't help but ask, "Where did you find this shield turtle jade?" Dake, "Shield turtle jade?" Professor Ka Zayer nodded. Shield turtle jade, a product of a high-grade magic beast called the shield turtle. It's located at the top of the turtle's shell, and it can absorb physical impact and convert it into magic power for the shield turtle. It's an excellent material for making shields. A material for making shields, huh? That's pretty much what I guessed. Dake thought for a moment and came up with a plan in his mind. He then said goodbye to Professor Zaire and quickly returned to the dormitory. Then he made a decision. He summoned Meow Meow and told it the function of the shield turtle jade. He also told it to make a wooden shield with the shield turtle jade as the center. Meow Meow took back its bead and looked at Dake in disbelief. Its attitude toward Dake after he got the bead last night was still vivid in its mind. In fact, it attributed part of the reason why it was forgiven to Dake was because of the gift. But after it got the bead again, this thought was overturned. It couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Dake carefully observed Meow Meow's reaction and knew that he had made the right move. He couldn't help but smile, and then he began to prepare the basic refining method for the magic fairy. Tonight, he was going to use up all of Vlad's soul powder. 2 in 1 4000 plus. Stuck. Chapter 331. In terms of value, Vlad's soul powder was second only to Angel's Feather and Dragon's Reverse Scale among all the core materials Dake had obtained. Normally, Dake would treat a material of this level more seriously. But who told it to be Vlad's remains? If he was worried about something, it was better to refine it as soon as possible. Before the experiment, Dake glanced at the clock on the wall. After confirming that it was just past 7, he began his preparations step by step. He could be considered an experiment expert now, and handling all kinds of materials was a piece of cake for him. For a basic refinement method like this, he could complete the first step in just half an hour. However, the refinement of the magic fairy would only enter the critical stage after the first refinement formation was activated. Dake held the small bottle of soul powder in his hand and narrowed his eyes at the white light emitted by the first refinement formation. The basic refinement could only have one core. Putting in 2 or more core materials would result in an accident due to the intense conflict between the materials. Since he chose to use soul powder as the core this time, he could only add some supplementary materials at most. He remembered the website. Vipkanchu. VIP Vlad was a vampire and the darling of the moonlit night, so his soul was naturally most compatible with bliss. In addition, pride could also be considered. However, pride didn't have as much storage as bliss, so Dake's final choice was still bliss. 7. 3 points of bliss. 4 great sins. 7 was a very special number. 7 points of great sins was enough to create a fruit of great sins. Then, what would happen if he directly threw 7 points of bliss into the first refinement formation? In theory, 7 points of bliss wouldn't be as effective as the fruit of bliss, but without the corresponding catgrass, he had no choice. Whether he lived or died depended on his fate. It depended on Dake's fate, and also on Vlad's fate. Doc took a deep breath and focused his attention. Then, he opened the small bottle containing the soul powder. He prepared a total of 3 bottles. One contained soul powder, the second contained bliss, and the third contained saliva. It was Dake's habit to add saliva to the magic fairy's refinement. Because the effect had always been good, he kept using it. Saliva was an excellent catalyst in the process of refining magic elven cards. Human saliva contained rich elements that could promote the formation of life. Dake had also realized that his saliva might be a high-grade supplementary material. However, when the small bottle containing the soul powder was opened, Leah, who was far away in Midya's dormitory, suddenly reacted. She put down the book in her hand and walked to the short cabinet next to the bookcase. She carefully took out the glass bottle with a diameter of 13 centimeters. After so many days, the bubble, soul, in the bottle had completely condensed and formed. It was like a small baby curled up in the transparent liquid. But when the bottle was taken out, the little baby opened its eyes under the gaze of Leah. A trace of blood-red light flashed through its small eyes. Leah had a thought and could not help but ask hesitantly, "What is it that made it react?" Professor Midya walked over and asked curiously, "Leah, what are you trying to do?" Leah smiled. "Aren't we friends?" Midya couldn't help but sigh. It was the same question again. She really wanted to say that they weren't friends, but she couldn't say it out loud. In her heart, Leah was more important than a friend. She was a benefactor. Dake didn't know what kind of reaction Vlad's soul powder would cause. He just followed his own steps as usual. Soul powder was a type of powder that glowed. If there was no barrier to seal the bottle, it would quickly dissipate in the wind. Therefore, the use of soul powder had to be very careful. He had to put it into the light of the refining array before opening the bottle. After Dake did this, the soul powder in the bottle slowly slid down along the angle of the bottle and was sucked into the refining array. He maintained absolute patience and only used his finger to gently move the bottle, making the entire refining process extremely slow. He carefully observed the changes in the light of the refining array. After half of the soul powder was swallowed, the light gradually grew stronger. Dake used his other hand to pick up the processed saliva and poured half of it into the bottle to suppress the light. Then, he continued to pour in the soul powder. When there was not a bit of soul powder left in the bottle, he reached for the thinking bottle that contained bliss, and used the magical brain dropper to absorb the bliss inside. Speaking of the magical brain dropper, it was supposed to be an old dropper with only 1 year left to live. But Dake gradually realized that it seemed to be living more and more comfortably. Was it the final radiance of the setting sun? In short, the intelligence level of the magical brain dropper was only 0.1, which was basically the level of a paramecium. If it died, he would just change it. He could not be sentimental because of the death of a tool. At most, he would make it into a specimen to commemorate it. Dake skillfully extracted a drop of bliss, which was about 1 point, and then dripped it into the number 1 refining array that was emitting light. However, with this drop, the light of the refining array suddenly flickered frequently. Dake was not in a hurry. He continued to drip the second drop of bliss. Then, the third drop, the fourth drop, but when he reached the 6th drop, he stopped. The light of the refining array did not stop flickering as he expected. Instead, it became more and more frequent, as if it would explode instantly if another drop was added. Dake put the tip of the magical brain dropper into the thinking bottle and absorbed the 7th drop of bliss. There was only a thin layer of liquid left in the thinking bottle. He thought about it, and in the end, he was extremely cautious. He dripped the 7th drop of bliss into the refining array. When the pink liquid slid from the tip of the magical brain dropper and gradually fell into the light, a strong light suddenly erupted like a sudden flash of lightning. Dake subconsciously reached out to block it. He only felt a blazing heat on his face, and then the light quickly faded. The number 1 refining array quickly shrank onto the card surface, and the internal circuit was operating at high speed. Dake carefully sensed and confirmed that the aura was still stable. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. Although experimental accidents were inevitable in long-term experiments, of course, they should be avoided if possible. He just did not know if the final refining would be successful. Behind him, the magic elves also came over slightly. Only Meow Meow was still focused on carving its small shield. It was not distracted at all. As some pitch-black impurities were expelled, the silk threads that were produced from the magic card gradually wrapped the entire card into a glowing cocoon. Generally, at this point, it meant that the entire experiment had a high probability of success. Although it was not uncommon for a pool of black water to flow out when the cocoon was cut open, it was still a low probability event. At this point, Dake could not help but feel a little expectant. A magic elven that consumed a bottle of soul powder and a whole 7 points of bliss to refine. What could it be? The basic refining method had an extremely low lower limit and a relatively high upper limit. Although the probability of reaching the upper limit was minuscule, there was always a little bit of hope. It was this little bit of hope that made the poor mages throw their limited resources into the bottomless pit again and again. If Dake had not found his own set of refining magic elves, he was not sure if he could withstand this temptation. While thinking, Dake reached out and pressed his hand on the cocoon, naturally injecting a trace of magic to sense it. It was not until a few minutes later that he retracted his hand. He took out a mercury knife from the shelf at the side and carefully cut open the cocoon. When the first ray of light shot out from the gap, a bone-chilling eeriness quietly spread out. Dake's hand that was about to cut open the cocoon paused for a moment. However, he still continued to cut it open. When the cocoon was cut in half, it suddenly melted into a pool of black water. Dake quickly grabbed a towel from the side and blocked the black water, preventing it from flowing down the table. Then, he looked at the magic card that was lying quietly on the table, its surface covered by the black water. From the edges of the contaminated card, strands of golden light were stubbornly emitting. That was the symbol of a gold card. Dake only took a glance and did not pay attention to the strands of golden light. The gold card that was extremely rare and precious in the eyes of others had become rare and ordinary in his hands. He was more or less used to it. Of course, he still had to be excited, but he did not show it on his face. After using a pair of tweezers to pick up the magic card and rinse it clean, Dake then carefully observed it. His gaze first fell on the stars on the top of the card. There were 3 stars. It was a level that was beyond his expectations and seemed too low. The soul of a vampire whose basic strength was above level 7 plus 7 points of bliss, and the final result was only a 3-star card? No one would believe it if he said it. However, the truth was right in front of him. Perhaps, this is the charm of the basic cultivation method. Dake sighed slightly and continued to look. What appeared on the card was a cute sprite that did not match the cold and gloomy aura. Dake originally thought that the sprite emitting that kind of aura would be some kind of evil spirit, but he did not expect it to be such a dream demon. The term, dream demon, basically came from the word, nightmare. Although it was a ghost-type Pokemon, it didn't look threatening at all. It was about 0.7 meters tall, had a soft body, and its dark green body gave people a warm feeling. Its eyes reflected red, and there was a conspicuous string of red beads around its neck. It was said that the beads were able to absorb fear. The dream demon would always approach from behind in the middle of the night and let out a sobbing cry, using the string of red beads to absorb fear and use it as its own nourishment. Card name, Dream Demon. Type, Sprite card. Level, ****. Race, Undying. Attribute, Ghost type. Magic power, 1600. Attack, 1500. Defense, 800. Killing skills, Dream Eater, Fright, Telekinesis, Fear Gem. What kind of transformation did it experience from a vampire to a nightmare? Dake had no way of knowing the mystery. However, the sprite that was refined in the end was not a vampire, which made him feel relieved. If he refined a little Vlad, he really would not know what to do with it. He carefully recalled the Pokemon called Dream Demon, and only remembered that it should be a ghost-type Pokemon with a mischievous personality that could evolve into a relatively calm Dream Demon. Can a Dream Demon refined using Bliss evolve through Bliss 3? This thought immediately surfaced. However, he suppressed the urge to immediately try it out and continued to study the Dream Demon's interface data. It has more than 1,500 points of magic power and top-notch attack power. Is its weakness its defense? However, since it is a ghost-type undying species, it should be partially immune to physical attacks. The key is the killing skills. Dake immediately injected magic power and quickly received information about the 4 killing skills. Dream Eater, Fright, Telekinesis, Fear Gem? What are these skills? What's a Fear Gem? The sudden shock made Dake a little absent-minded. Because other than the killing skill, Fear Gem, the other 3 skills were not offensive or defensive skills in the conventional sense. Among them, Dream Eater was a skill with decent power, but it was not an elemental skill. It was a killing skill that could only be used against creatures in the sleeping state. Fright was a skill that didn't deal any damage and could only scare the opponent into retreating. In the Pokemon game, Telekinesis was a skill that increased the hit rate of the player. It could not be said to be useless, but it was definitely a pain in the ass. However, Dake calmed himself down and quickly convinced himself to have a deeper understanding. He continued to inject magic power and more information flowed into his mind. Dream Eater. The Dream Demon can invade dreams and eat the other party's dreams, turning them into its own magic power and causing great mental damage. Fright. Frighten the other party by screaming suddenly and making them feel more afraid. Telekinesis. Move objects using superpower. Fear gem. Absorbs the emotions of fear and turns them into magic power to be stored in the fear gem. When necessary, it can release a gem-like magic light to attack. Invade dreams, dream eater, make people feel fear, telekinesis, absorb fear, convert magic power, store magic power. So that's how it is. A standard nightmare skill. Dake pondered for a moment and seemed to understand something. The red string of beads hanging around the dream demon's neck was the so-called fear gem. And this killing skill seemed to be derived from the strength gem. This set of killing skills basically forms the physiological needs of the dream demon. The magic elf does not have the ability to hunt and digest, so it forcibly creates a stomach. Interesting. 2 in 1 4,000 plus. Chapter 332. With a hint of anticipation, Dake used the usual summoning skill to summon the dream demon. Then, he quickly grabbed it. Although the dream demon wasn't a gaseous Pokemon like Onishi, its body was still light and felt like a ball of cotton in his hand. It felt great to the touch. Little demon, he used a total of 7 points of bliss to refine this dream demon. As expected, after it was summoned, it opened its eyes wide and pounced on him. After Dake caught it, he raised it up high and carefully observed the fear gem on its neck. If he could effectively use this pearl that could store magic, the dream demon's strength would undoubtedly increase by a terrifying amount. Just from the description of the ultimate skill, he could tell that the magic light released by the fear gem would definitely be stronger the more magic it had. He just didn't know how much magic the fear gem could store. Could it be converted into the dream demon's own magic? What was the limit of its magic storage? 1 second to remember. https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. If there was a limit of 10 to 20,000 magic and it could be converted into the dream demon's own magic, even if the conversion rate was only 3 points per second, he could rely on Dream Eater and Fright to allow the dream demon to survive outside. In short, this was a magical fairy that could be raised. In addition, the dream demon that had the ultimate skill, telekinesis, could also use its superpower to replace its limbs, making it very convenient in daily life. As for Dream Eater, other than a night attack, it could be used together with the little demon's Devil's Hypnosis. However, Dake was more concerned about whether it could use Dream Eater to invade and control the other party's dream like a real nightmare demon. If it could really control the dream demon's use wouldn't be as simple as it seemed on the surface. Little demon, heart suit. The dream demon forcefully twisted its petite body and desperately wanted to pounce on Dake's face. Dake used Pride Eye on it to calm it down and at the same time activate its intelligence. Then, he held the dream demon in his arms and stretched out his fingers to tease it. Come, try to catch it. Dake pointed at the little demon on the bird rack. The dream demon obediently opened her eyes, and a red light burst out from her eyes. The little demon beast that was hanging upside down on the bird's stand suddenly stiffened. Red ripples appeared on the surface of its body, and then it was involuntarily pulled down from the air. Sure enough, the mana consumption is negligible, and it won't enter cooldown when used daily. How enviable! With a sure kill skill like telekinesis, I won't have to come out of my bed when I want to grab something. Dake scratched the dream demon's chin, and it giggled, relaxing its mental strength. The little demonic beast finally broke free from the restraints of the superpower and bared its fangs at the dream demon. However, the dream demon quietly stuck out her pink tongue and made a lull at him. His mischievous personality was beginning to show. After experimenting with telekinesis, Dake began to think about the possibility of evolving the dream demon. As for the other 3 sure kill skills, there was no immediate condition to test them. He could only continue to research them later. Dake thought about it, and first introduced the dream demon to the magic guide fairies. Other than the little demon beast that had just suffered, no one gave it a bad look. But if one were to say that he was very welcome, that might not necessarily be the case. After walking around, Dake put the Dream Demon down and seriously pulled out Bliss 3. Now, it was time to witness a miracle. Dream Demon was a Pokemon with the potential to evolve. It relied on the Stone of Darkness to evolve from Dream Demon to Dream Demon. Although the difference between Dream Demon and Dream Demon was only 60 points, evolution was still evolution. Dream Demon was like an adult Dream Demon, with a more stable personality and stronger moves. Different from Dream Demon that only used its cries as a tool to scare, Dream Demon could make cries like a spell. It was said that people who heard it would suffer from headaches and hallucinations. However, it was also hidden, and occasionally it would make people feel happy. Also, the powerful Dream Demon also had the ability to distort space and create illusions. In the illusions, it could make all sorts of things happen that couldn't happen in reality. People who were caught in the illusions of the Dream Demon would find it hard to distinguish between reality and illusion, and would easily get lost. In short, it was very powerful. However, all of this was based on one of the Great Sin's 3 cards being able to evolve the Dream Demon. In theory, Bliss 3 should be able to do it. However, before the experiment was carried out, everything was still an undetermined matter. Swipe card, Evolve. When Bliss 3's light illuminated the entire dorm, the Dream Demon was bathed in the pink light. At first, it was a bit confused, but then it greedily sucked in the power that was completely compatible with its origin. As the light continued to enter its body, its originally small and cute body gradually expanded. A badge that symbolized bliss gradually appeared between its eyebrows and became brighter and brighter. Instead, it released light that covered its entire body like a pink cloak. Following that, the Dream Demon's lifeform, under the watchful eyes of all the magic elves, completed an earth-shaking transformation. Its body color changed from a warm dark green to an even colder dark purple. The shape of its head became like a mage's pointy hat, and on both sides of the hat protruded 4 horns. Its body also became more slender and more humanoid. It was like wearing a noble mage's robe. The beads that once hung on its neck transformed into 3 red gems embedded on its body, emitting a powerful aura. A successfully evolved Dream Demon. It was as mysterious as a mage. It was as profound as a sage. Card name, Dream Demon. Type, Elven card. Level, Race, Undying Species. Attribute, Spectre type. Magic power, 2700. Attack, 2500. Defense, 1600. Killing skills, Gem of Fear, Pain Sharing, Same Life, Nightmare Realm. Dake immediately injected his magic power into the Dream Demon magic card and received a detailed feedback. It's actually a 5-star. The expected gold card, an unexpected 5-star. After using Bliss 3, the 3-star Dream Demon actually became a 5-star. Does this mean that after using Greed 3, Meow Meow can also evolve into a 5-star cat boss? Looks like the production of Greed 3 is imperative. Dake quickly thought, and further speculated. Then he noticed the 3 attributes of the Dream Demon. A 5-star attribute had a maximum value of 2500. But the Dream Demon's magic power had broken through the limit by 200 points. Its attack had also reached the maximum value. Its slightly inferior defense, under the contrast of magic power and attack, was simply insignificant. With such an excessive 3 attributes, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was a 6-star magic elven. It seemed that after evolving, the Dream Demon finally burst out the potential of the vampire Vlad. So much so that its 4 sure-kill skills had undergone earth-shattering changes. It was completely different from the Dream Demon, which was more inclined towards the nightmare. The Dream Demon was like a demon. Among its 4 killing skills, only the Fear Gem from the Dream Demon era was preserved. Among the other 3 skills, although they weren't as terrifying as the Song of Perishing, they were still very powerful and strange. First was Pain Sharing. Pain Sharing, after adding your remaining HP and the target's remaining HP, share it amicably. Hiss. The terrifying thing about this killing skill was that it could allow one to survive in a desperate situation, pulling the opponent's HP down to a certain level. And for the magic elven, the so-called HP was magic power. In other words, it was magic power sharing. If this is combined with Kettle's strength sharing and defense sharing, wouldn't it be the real, all-life sharing? First pull the opponent down to a certain level, then rely on its rich experience to defeat it. The corner of Dake's mouth curled up, and he couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. Then he continued to look at the next killing skill. Same life. Same fate, both jade and common stone perish together. After using same life, when the opponent is heavily injured or on the verge of death, the opponent will also receive almost the same amount of damage, limited by magic power. Although the effects of same life were slightly different from the settings in the Pokemon game, Dake still held his breath when he saw it. Magic power limitation should be a limitation on magic creations like the magic elven, as well as magic power limitations on non-magic creations. After all, the life of the magic elven is made up of magic power, so the loss of magic power in same life is naturally magic power. This should be the same for pain sharing as well. Originally, it was only effective on near-death same life, but now it can also be effective on heavily injured people, which can be considered as expanding the scope of its application. If the opponent is the vampire Vlad, and he successfully kills the dream demon in same life state, will his magic power be instantly emptied? It's a pity that there isn't a second Vlad for me to experiment with. Dake couldn't help but feel a trace of regret. But no matter what, same life was a terrifying killing skill that could make the opponent tremble in fear in a magic duel. Compared to the seemingly harmless dream demon, the dream demon was simply malevolent. The final killing skill, Nightmare Realm. This is another derivative skill similar to the Gem of Fear. Dake had never seen Nightmare Realm in the Pokemon series before, so he couldn't help but concentrate even more. Nightmare Realm. Open up the Nightmare Realm, causing people to enter a dreamland. The Dream Demon can distort space within the Nightmare Realm, creating illusions. Effect 1. Distort space, teleport, swap position with the target. Effect 2. Distort space, the faster the target, the slower the target, the faster the target, based on the speed of the Dream Demon. Effect 3. Create illusions, causing people to be unable to differentiate reality from illusion, causing them to fall into chaos. It's actually a field skill. Dake couldn't help but feel apprehensive. Having a field skill was equivalent to having a field card, able to create one's own field. Moreover, this Dream Demon's field skill, with one look, was a combination of field swap, trick space, and illusion ray. It was equivalent to using one skill to replace 3 skills. The strength of the effect was self-evident. At this moment, Dake already found it hard to look straight at the Dream Demon. Its strength was no longer limited to its star level and attribute, it was a killing weapon against high star level magic guide sprites. 4 killing skills combined, it was especially terrifying. Just the combination Dake came up with in such a short period of time was enough to frighten people. For example, after entering the same life state, by swapping positions to receive the opponent's killing skill, it could kill the high star level magic guide sprite. If it was only heavily injured but not dead, it could still use pain sharing and share its mana with the opponent's magic guide sprite. Perhaps after activating the Nightmare Realm, looking at the high-speed magic guide sprite crawling on the ground like a tortoise was a form of speechless pleasure. The Dream Demon's only flaw was that it lacked a direct attack method. The Gem of Fear was a spirit-type version of the Gem of Strength. Although its might wasn't bad, it needed to absorb the emotions of fear to accumulate enough mana. This wasn't easy to achieve in the Academy. Only after communicating with the Academy could the Dream Demon be released, adding a little spice to the dull and dull Academy life of the children. Following that, Dake ordered the Dream Demon to activate the Nightmare Realm in the dormitory. Demon Heart Suit, but the Dream Demon suddenly flew up, using its magic robe-like body to cover his head, stirring up restlessly. Dake hurriedly pulled it down from his head, lightly scolding, "Be obedient." Demon Heart Suit, the dream demon raised her head and rubbed her face against his. Then, she turned around and used her nightmare realm on the empty ground. Purple smoke slowly emanated from its body, spreading out in all directions like a cloud of smoke. But when Dark and the other magic-guiding fairies were distracted by the smoke, the nightmare realm had already spread out noiselessly. It was also an area effect, but it didn't reject the paradise effect. Instead, there was a special feeling of harmony. As the smoke rose, Dark suddenly felt his vision blur. The dream demon suddenly disappeared and was replaced by a young sorceress wearing a purple sorcerer's robe and a round sorcerer's hat. She held an ornate magic staff in her hand. She wore spectacles, her skin was fair, her figure was slender, quiet and confident. Hidden under the magic robe, her chest was astonishing. This was the type that Dake liked. But following that, a high-speed kettle whizzed past like a train, causing him to return to reality from the illusion. 2 in 1 4000 plus. Yesterday's work was a complete mess, I'm going crazy. Chapter 333. BZZZ. In this nightmare realm, who was the most excited? Of course it was Hoo-Hoo. Ever since Hoo-Hoo was born, it had never imagined that one day it would enjoy the joy of galloping like the wind. Now that it had obtained its wish, it was naturally excited as it scurried around. On the contrary, the nimble Diru beast was like a quagmire, frowning from time to time. Of the 3 effects of the nightmare realm, only the effect from the juggling dimension was the most prominent. As for the other effects of position exchange and illusion creation, they all required the dream demon to initiate. Especially the illusion creation effect, it required a huge amount of magic power and energy. To be able to create such a realistic magical maiden in such a short period of time, it was already not easy. While all the magical spirits were distracted by the nightmare realm, the magical maiden transformed by the dream demon suddenly pounced towards Dake. Website https://m Vipkanchu. VIP Dake did not dodge, he extended his arms and hugged the dream demon's body. In the end, it's just an illusion. His lips curled into a smile, he was extremely satisfied with the dream demon's nightmare realm. However, the nightmare realm only lasted for a short 3 minutes from the time it was released to the end. After that, it needed more magic power to support it. The dormitory thus returned to its original state. Hoo-Hoo, who was abruptly returned to its original form, was filled with disappointment. But it suddenly turned its head to look at the dream demon, its eyes gradually ignited with flames. BZZZ. Following the destruction of the illusion, the scene of the dream demon cuddling in Dake's embrace was exposed. Almost an instant later, 2 ribbon-like tentacles flew over. However, the 2 tentacles suddenly came to a stop and stopped in midair. Fairy Ibu, who was able to restrain himself, pretended nothing happened as he scurried over. Dake stretched out a hand and scratched his chin, causing him to release a soft moan. While the atmosphere of the Aristocrats Academy's Dormitory 201 gradually warmed up, in Professor Midia's dormitory, a variable was constantly occurring. Leah had already placed the glass bottle with a diameter of 13 centimeters on the desk before this. She sat in front of the desk and carefully observed the soul in the glass bottle. Her frown deepened. From the moment Dake opened the bottle containing the soul powder, the baby soul inside the glass bottle quietly opened its eyes. Although there was no light in its eyes, it was indeed a sign that it was about to regain consciousness. This was definitely beyond Leah's expectations. She had obtained a part of Vlad's soul before his death and used it to create a bottle similar to a phylactery. Once Vlad's main body died, his consciousness would be instantly transferred to this soul fragment. After a period of careful nurturing, a complete vampire soul could be gradually cultivated. After that, she naturally had her uses. However, if Vlad's consciousness were to recover before his soul was fully cultivated, it would be a hindrance to her plans. Because what she needed was both Vlad and not Vlad. But tonight, there were many variables. As time passed, Vlad's soul reacted more violently. The moment the dream demon was refined, the intensity of its reaction reached an extreme. Lia almost thought that Vlad's soul would awaken at that moment. Fortunately, the worst-case scenario did not happen. After that, Vlad's soul became slightly quieter. But Lia clearly felt that something had disappeared with Vlad's silence. This feeling made her feel very bad. However, she could not do anything about it. Midya Bartholomew was reading a book in her bed, pretending that she did not know anything about Lia. In fact, she really did not know the details. Moreover, she did not try to investigate. She and Lia met again on the way to the Shang Malian Academy. Because she believed that Lia would not be a threat to the Shang Malian Academy, and because she did have a legitimate reason to enter the academy, Midya agreed to her request and brought her into the academy. For Midya, this was just a small matter. But she could repay the kindness of saving her when she was young. During the time she entered the academy, Lia was indeed well behaved. Even when she went to class, she would hide under her hat until... When did she start to become restless? As a senior astrologer, Midya was quite sensitive to the happenings of some things. Even without a prophecy, she could generally feel it. Things were getting out of her control. But at the moment, she had a premonition. Should she sit and wait for things to ferment? Or should she intervene? Add fuel to the fire? A good prophet was a prophet who wished for the world to be in chaos. Tonight, the starry sky was still the same. The bonds between people formed shining stars in the sky, flickering from time to time. Dake Dimeng waited for the dream demon to degenerate into a dream demon and temporarily put it back into the magic card. After that, he made a detailed record of the results of this experiment and used the remaining time to make armors for the magic elves. Of course, before going to bed, he did not forget to draw today's great sin. Combining soul loss spell and underworld magic, it was still 5 points. He chose greed. His goal was to first refine greed 3. But there was not much greed left to draw. Perhaps he would temporarily draw pride and think of a way to increase greed. But greed was different from bliss and gluttony. How to increase greed efficiently was a difficult problem for him. The night gradually deepened. Aristocrat Compound's room 201 quietly quieted down. Dake gradually fell asleep while thinking. The magic elves relied on their own habits and climbed onto their respective beds. Tick. The hands of the wall clock passed by 0 o'clock. The card bag on the desk suddenly trembled. Then, the cover of the card bag was pushed open little by little. A magic card poked its head out and gently landed on the desk. A dark green magic elven slowly floated out from the card. Its big red eyes rolled around, like a kitten stealing a fish, looking at the quiet dormitory. The Dilu beast, who was curled up in Dake's bed, suddenly opened its eyes. But it only glanced at it and then closed them again. A pink tentacle also softly drooped down. Mimi, the cute dream demon, twisted its body in the air. The gem of fear on its neck glowed faintly. Dake Dimeng had a dream of being eaten. After excitedly enjoying its master's dream, the little dream demon turned its gaze to the other magic elves in the dormitory. But it quickly realized that these magic elves were in a half-asleep state. It seemed that if it touched them, they would wake up. It couldn't help but pout. After losing its target, the dream demon walked around the dormitory in boredom. It didn't leave the place where it was born and go to the foreign world. Finally, it laid on Doc's face and closed its eyes in a daze. With the natural depletion of its magic power, it naturally returned to the magic card. Thus, when Dake woke up, he found the dream demon's magic card on the desk. His card bag fell to the side. Dake. After a while, he picked up the magic card and drew a hexagram magic circle with his finger. The magic power that was depleted was slowly replenished. In the name of Dake Dimeng, I summon the magic card. After chanting softly, the dream demon that was dozing off was summoned from the magic card. It didn't realize that what awaited it was a terrifying trial. Mimi. The dream demon that was being kneaded woke up with a scream. Then, it continued to be kneaded and kneaded. After a few minutes, Dake finally figured out the truth. The dream demon did sneak out from the magic card and ate his dream. But when he asked about his dream, the dream demon kept drooling and shaking its head. This made him even more curious. But the dream demon immediately started to act cute and kept rubbing against him. Gradually, he gave up on the idea of getting to the bottom of the matter. As for why the dream demon could come out of the magic card by itself, Dake asked seriously. The dream demon also answered seriously. In the end, he didn't get anything. Dake could only search carefully for information. This information just so happened to be mentioned in the book Spirit Magus Red's Summoning Forum. The differences between summoning magic spirits and other magic spirits. How could a magic fairy come out of the magic card by itself? There was once a mage who did research on this. The final conclusion was that unless they had an intelligence level of 3.0 or above and mastered a skill similar to summoning, or they had a special ability to condense a body. Intelligence was a prerequisite. Under normal circumstances, a magic fairy with an intelligence level of 2.0 wouldn't have the idea of coming out of the card. If the intelligence level was not high enough, other methods would have to be used to make up for it. For example, fetters. Fetters, as a part of the power of the mind, played a huge role in the spirit summoning. It could cause the magic fairy to trigger additional emotions above the intelligence level. Thus, it had the subjective initiative to come out of the magic card. Moreover, if the fetters were strong enough, they could trigger the spirit summoning, so that the magic fairy could rely on the power of the fetters to summon itself out of the magic card. Without summoning, the magic fairy would come out to save its master. This was originally a huge selling point of the spirit summoning. But did I establish fetters with the dream demon? Dake couldn't help but shake his head. Since it has nothing to do with the spirit summoning, then does it have the ability to condense a body? Demonic Mimi? This was a mystery. Beep, beep, beep. The sudden notification made Dake come back to his senses. When he took out the constantly vibrating school card from his card bag, he thought that the dual class this morning was about to change classrooms. He didn't expect that it wasn't Professor Cheong-si who sent the notification, but Professor Nini. There are so many things to do during this period and I can't do it well. I'm out every day and I'm about to break down. For now, it's temporarily over. I'll postpone it to next month. I hope there's nothing else in the latter half of this month. I really can't take it anymore. I'll continue to update. Guess A or B. Chapter 334. Professor Nini. Dake looked at the notice on the school card and suddenly had an ominous feeling. Could it be that Professor Shi Erfu really approved her application? Doc clicked on the notification in astonishment. He originally thought that a responsible person like Professor Shi Erfu wouldn't approve Professor Nini's application for a one-day trip to the underground city. However, the reality before his eyes seemed to be seriously challenging his rationality. Professor Nini. Yay. Professor Shi Erfu approved my application. We will officially enter the underground city at 10 o'clock in the morning for a half-day adventure. Please be prepared in advance and don't forget to bring lunch. It changed from a one-day trip to a half-day trip? But is there a fundamental difference? Dake's face instantly darkened. The notice didn't say that there would be other professors accompanying them. If it was just Professor Nini alone, would she be able to take care of an entire grade of students? Also, why was this notice getting more and more unreliable? He remembered the URL. Vipkanchu. 6 bringing lunch? Was this a spring outing? Speaking of which, spring had arrived. Since the snow on Valentine's Day, the weather had been gradually warming up. It was March after all. Dake thought for a moment and left a message on the message board that he had specially bought. He told the magic guide elves to be prepared to be summoned at any time after they woke up. Then, he took down the basket from the little devil beast's claws and began to enjoy his breakfast. Demonic Mimi, the dream demon, came over. Dake used a fork to pick up a cherry for decoration and fed it into its mouth. Ah! The little devil beast's eyebrows twitched when it saw this, and it followed suit and came over as well. Dake was stunned, but he still picked up a strawberry and stuffed it into its mouth. Munch munch. The little fiend beast chewed the strawberry mechanically and didn't know why it suddenly wanted to cry. Was begging for food such a simple thing? How many times had it missed the chance to beg for food? Demonic Mimi? The dream demon turned to look at it with a puzzled expression. After Dake finished his breakfast, he found a spare lunchbox from the cupboard and brought a bottle of apple juice and a bottle of milkweed juice. He then carried a basket and headed to the cafeteria with the little magical beast. Although the idea of a spring outing in the dungeon was a pain in the ass. But he believed it for the time being. After all, they had set off at 10 o'clock and would be back in half a day. They could only have lunch in the dungeon. She could go to the cafeteria to get some flour and knead some dough or use bread to make a few sandwiches. That would be more or less enough. I guess the other students must be thinking the same thing, right? However, when Dake walked into the kitchen, he didn't see any other students. Although he was curious, he did not probe further. When the halfling chef asked, he told him about the half-day tour of the underground city. The halfling ant immediately volunteered to help him prepare. When Dake came back to his senses, his lunchbox was already filled with a dazzling array of delicacies. They were all the types that could still retain their texture after cooling down. Dake quickly thanked her, but the halfling ant smiled and said, "Don't mention it. It is our duty to serve the children. As long as you like it, we are happy." Dake quickly thanked her again and left the kitchen. After that, he handed the lunchbox to the little magical beast and asked it to bring it back to the dormitory. He then went to class. There was still a dual class on Friday. After class, he had to go back to the dormitory and put the dual class textbook back. Then, he had to gather at the entrance of the castle. He just had to bring the lunchbox with him. However, some of the students didn't seem to think that way. When Dake walked into the classroom for the dual class, he was surprised to find that there were already many students in the classroom. Moreover, all of them had bags of various sizes stuffed with all kinds of snacks and fruits. When Professor Nini first mentioned the one-day tour of the underground city, they were all very shocked and worried. But when it really came to this, he had completely thrown that layer of concern to the back of his mind. Maybe it was because they trusted the professor. Or maybe it was because they were excited about the spring outing. Who knew? Dake turned back and walked to his familiar seat. When he sat down in the last row by the window, he saw Anna suddenly turn her head. Her pink face was full of excitement. Dake, guess what I brought?" "Dake. Candy." Anna took out a whole bag of candy from the drawer and said happily, "You guessed it right, Dake." Just when he was speechless, Luo C turned his head, patted his bag, and said, "Don't worry, I brought Anna's share." "It seems like he brought pastries or something like that. But you didn't think that I was surprised because Anna only brought candy and not lunch, right?" "I really wasn't." Dake patted his head and reminded, "Don't bring too much stuff, we're going to the underground city, not for an outing." A girl's physical strength was weak, and Rose belonged to the delicate type of girl. If she really carried such a big bag, she would not be able to walk for long after entering the underground city. Anna immediately said, "Don't worry, I have plenty of strength." Dake, "Okay, it seems like they have more to think about than I thought." Ring ring ring. When Professor Cheong-si stepped into the classroom, she immediately noticed the unusual atmosphere in the classroom. She couldn't help but ask, "What's up? Is there something good?" A boy from the Night Institute raised his hand bravely and said, "Yes, Professor. We're going to the underground city for an adventure." "Underground city for an adventure." Professor Cheong-si nodded and said, "Then today we'll talk about some duels in the underground city." AI Ma, who was sitting in the front row, asked curiously, "Professor Cheong-si, there are duels in the underground city?" "Of course there are." Professor Cheong-si walked to the podium and turned to look at the students. He smiled and said, "For magisters, duels are an important way to resolve disputes. Correspondingly, in different environments, there will be different rules. For example, the street duel that Dake Dimeng had on Valentine's Day was one of them. In the underground city, in order to not attract the attacks of monsters, there will be new rules. We usually call it a silent duel. Silent duel. At this moment, Dake's interest was piqued and he couldn't help but raise his head to listen carefully. Professor Cheong-si wrote the word silence on the blackboard and said, "Silent duels are usually built on the basis of the silence card. No matter if it's a magister or a magical elf, they must be within the range of the silence card. There are two main differences between it and a formal duel. 1. No sound can be made. 2. There is no magicite ball. In fact, most duels outside of competitions don't have magicite balls." Student Doran, do you have any questions? Doran, who had his right hand raised, immediately asked, "Professor Cheong-si, may I ask, what if there is no silence card?" Professor Cheong-si nodded with satisfaction. "That's a good question, but I can't answer you." Doran, Professor Cheong-si gestured for him to sit down and said, "The silence card is the basis of a silent duel. Without a muting card or a magic card with a similar effect as a foundation, it would be asking for trouble to engage in a duel in the underground city. As a professor, I don't recommend you to do this. If there is a day when you can't control yourself, please calm down and carefully consider whether you have the ability to face the monster wave. Alright, now let's continue. Dake Dimming, do you have any questions?" Dake put down his hand and stood up. "Professor, without the magicite ball, how do we determine victory?" Professor Cheong-si said, "I know you have experience in street duels, but the underground city's silent duel is fundamentally different from street duels. It exists to ensure safety and resolve disputes as quickly as possible. Therefore, a silent duel doesn't allow you to attack the opponent's body. We usually choose a 1-star magical elf to replace the magicite ball. Once this magical elf is destroyed, it means the magister has lost. So that's how it is." Dake nodded in understanding. At this point, he had a general understanding of the mechanism of the silent duel. After the silence card, the magisters could only use silent chanting to cast summoning spells. This required a high level of summoning skills. And in a situation where they couldn't communicate through voice, the tacit understanding between the magisters and the magical elf was especially important. How to communicate in a silent environment and how to communicate tactics to the magical elf in a timely manner. These were all techniques that could be used in special situations. In addition, bewitching voice, loud sound, and other skills that required sound to be transmitted would also lose their effects. In summary, the requirements for a magister in a silent duel were even higher than in a formal duel. In a silent duel in the underground city, the magisters would also try to choose short and quick duels. After all, the underground city was filled with danger. No one knew if a monster would suddenly jump out at the next moment. Professor Cheong-si explained the basic rules of a silent duel in detail. In the second half of the class, he had Dake and White demonstrate together on stage. As the kingdom's dual swordsmen and duelists who had joined the duel club, although there was a slight difference in strength between the two, it was still acceptable on the surface. White also seemed to have improved in this period of time. There was a clear fighting spirit in his eyes. Should it be said that he was worthy of being called the son of bravery? This kind of undying courage was rare and commendable. Both sides stood separately on the podium. According to Professor Jones, they were to be silent and start with 1 star. They wouldn't use a high-star magic fairy, nor would they use powerful curses or sure-kill skills. They would use small moves to quickly determine victory. It wasn't until he was ready that White suddenly realized that this was the first time he and Dake were going to face off in public. ZZ. Chapter 335. He had always regarded Dake as a competitor that he had to catch up with. However, they had never had a chance to duel each other, whether it was during the class competition, the recruitment competition, or the newcomer competition. Victor was basically killed by the other students in the process of climbing up the stairs. The only time he had a duel was when he had just finished refining the troll, and when he met him in the secret tunnel. Thinking about this, White's heart felt heavy. He reached out and pressed the magic card in his hand. With a 1-star magic guide spirit replacing the magic guide ball and the Archmage himself as the main body of the duel, most people would probably choose the magic beast, right? Thinking about it, how long had it been since he had summoned it? On the other side, Dake was ready. Remember, https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. The Shang Malian classroom was spacious, but it was still too small for a duel if it was limited to the area around the podium. Fortunately, this was only a demonstration in class. The purpose was not to win. Dake didn't care too much. In fact, he only put a few fantasy beasts back into the magic card. Seeing that the two were in position, Professor Cheong-si took out a silence card and said solemnly, "Next, I'll use the silence card. When the sound disappears, the duel will begin." "Okay." Dake nodded to Professor Cheong-si. White also nodded quickly. "Got it." Professor Cheong-si raised the silence card high and looked at the audience. The students who were whispering suddenly quieted down. Ai Ma, who was sitting in the front row, carefully held a magic card in her hand and looked at White cautiously. After the prophecy in the astronomy class, most of the students had a slight change in their view of White. After that, White and Luo Boat also studied seriously and didn't get their credits deducted because of their frequent tardiness. The students' perception of him gradually returned to normal. As a result, he began to look forward to the hero's son again. Humans were, in fact, quite forgetful. They tend to focus on the present rather than the past. He was more lenient to those who changed their ways and was stricter to those who made mistakes by chance. During this period, White had gained the favor of some students of the Academy of Knights, and they had more interactions with each other. At this time, they had even more expectations for his performance. Of course, the students of the aristocratic academy stood firmly on Dake's side. They felt that there was no suspense in the outcome of this silent duel. Luo Boat was the only one who whispered worriedly, no way, White wouldn't use the holy sword in this kind of situation, right? Logically speaking, he's not the kind of person who can't distinguish between right and wrong, but the look in his eyes. I don't think so, right? On the podium. After White Gouda nodded, he took a deep breath and stared intently at Dake. His brain was already working at high speed when he was called on the podium. He was very clear that there was still a large gap between himself and Dake Dimming. Perhaps the holy sword curse that had already been cast could make up for it, but to rely on an equipment card to reverse the situation in a formal duel was undoubtedly a pipe dream. But what if it was a silent duel? Restrictions on the starting point, restrictions on the level. Of course, a normal silent duel wouldn't have restrictions on the level of the magic elf card, but this duel would be held in a classroom. In order to not cause any damage, Professor Cheong-si had clearly stipulated that high-level magic elves couldn't be summoned. This gave him a chance. White's mind spun. Dake Diming's biggest advantage over the first years was that they had a large number of second-tier magic elves. Most of the first years, including him, didn't have the ability to refine second-tier magic elves. But now, this advantage had been leveled. White's eyes flashed and he suddenly held his breath. A sound. It disappeared in an instant. It's starting. Dake Dimeng hooked his finger and raised the magic elf card in his hand slightly. The silence card's activation was very obvious. In a noisy environment, a human sensitivity to sound would decrease. But once the sound completely disappeared, all the senses would produce a stress response, causing a person to instantly become conscious. Dake's reaction was very fast. In the blink of an eye, he had already begun to silently chant the incantation of the normal summoning spell. The silent chant did indeed slow down his summoning speed, but in reality, it wasn't that slow. He was still able to quickly complete the summoning. When the magic elf card in his hand gradually lit up, White's magic elf card still didn't have any luster. Immediately after, Fantasy Beast, Ibu, jumped out from the card and intimately called out to it. Of course, there was no sound. In that instant, Ibu-chan revealed a coquettish, shocked, and terrified expression. It wasn't until Dake winked at it that it came back to its senses. It took small steps to his side and stuck close to him. The successive changes in its expression and actions made the hearts of the girls in the front row melt. Because Ibu would attend astronomy class with everyone every Wednesday night, the first-year students were already very familiar with it. Occasionally, someone would even feed it before and after class. Although Ibu tried very hard to refuse, the more it was like this, the more people couldn't resist it. Now that it was frowning and showing a pitiful look, it immediately resonated with a lot of people. Finally, White finished silently chanting the normal summoning spell. The magic elf card in his hand emitted a faint white light, and a long-awaited deer of light appeared in front of him. This is... Because they hadn't seen this stag for so long, quite a few of the little magisters actually didn't recognize it as White's fantasy beast. After the stag was summoned, it sniffed hard twice and then stomped on the ground with its front hooves. The silence was better than any sound. "Good fellow, is it boiling with battle intent?" White couldn't help but reach out to touch the stag's back. But just as he was about to touch it, the stag shook hard and pushed his hand back. White jerked his hand back, a little embarrassed. Fortunately, it wasn't obvious in the silent environment. His face paled slightly, but he immediately put this matter to the back of his mind and focused on the silent duel. In the rules of the silent duel, the one-star magic elf summoned at the start was the default replacement for the magisters. Then, the real duel would begin. Seeing that Dake wasn't in a hurry to attack, White gritted his teeth and reached out to pull out one of his trump cards, the Radiant Python. As a 3-star magic elf, the Radiant Python had high attributes of 1,400 on 3 sides. Although it was slightly inferior to the troll, it was still a 3-star overlord magic elf. In this small space, the Radiant Python, as a snake, had an easier time than the troll. Only when he started summoning did Dake leisurely take out a second magic card. Dake had some guesses as to which magic elf White could summon. In short, it was a choice between the troll and the Radiant Python. Unless he refined a new magic guiding fairy, these 2 magic guiding fairies would have to take turns. He didn't think too much about it and directly summoned Meow Meow. Although it was a beat slower, both magic elves were summoned at almost the same time. Finally, the gigantic Radiant Python attracted more attention. The giant python, as thick as a water bucket, raised its head, its delicate snake scales reflecting a clear white light under the room's light, and the snow-white gem on its head emitted a warm jade-like light. Although it was a reptile known for its cold-bloodedness, the Radiant Python's slender eyes contained a water-like gentleness. Without a doubt, it was synonymous with beauty and holiness. Compared to White's other magic elf, the troll, it was the complete opposite. And the Meow Meow that Dake summoned had inherited the usual style of his magic elf, so cute that it made people want to hug it tightly. The last time Meow Meow appeared was in the street duel on Valentine's Day. But at that time, Meow Meow wasn't the main character, so no one noticed how much power was hidden in this petite magic elf's body. The soundless environment made Meow Meow's hair stand on end, but the meow it let out was like a stone sinking into the sea, without causing any ripples. Confused, it could only turn its head to look at its master, its half-opened eyes revealing a doubtful light. Dake made an okay gesture, then pointed at White's stag, and with a forceful chop on its neck, he signaled to behead. Meow Meow calmed down and immediately turned to look at the opposite side. A giant python with a huge body and a pure prey. It raised its claws, stuck out its tongue, and licked it, revealing a greedy bloodthirst. Then, Meow Meow, whose magic power and attack were both at the peak of 1,500, suddenly darted out before the Radiant Python started to move. For felines, hunting was a natural instinct engraved in their bones. It stretched its body in the air, and from beginning to end, it was terrifyingly coordinated. In the blink of an eye, it crossed the distance between the 2 sides. Then, without paying any attention to the clumsy giant python, it spun on its feet, and with a Z shake, it flashed past the Radiant Python and pounced on the stag behind it. At that moment, White couldn't help but open his mouth and shout. He obviously wanted to shout out the Radiant Python's ultimate skill, Sacred Light, but under the cover of the silence card, no sound came out. Humans were like this. Even if they knew they couldn't make a sound, they wouldn't shut their mouths. White, who realized that he couldn't make a sound, couldn't help but anxiously look at the back of the Radiant Python, hoping that his thoughts could be transmitted through the connection between the Magister and the Magic Elf. but the radiant python didn't meet his expectations. When Meow Meow passed by, it instinctively raised its snake tail and lashed out. But it was a whole beat slower, and it didn't even hit Meow Meow's shadow. The radiant python's long tail landed heavily on the ground. As the ground trembled, Meow Meow's 4 legs exerted force and pounced again. It stretched its limbs in the air, and its slightly raised right claw suddenly popped out sharp dagger-like nails, aiming precisely at the stag's neck. But the stag, whose nostrils were constantly breathing out, reacted quickly and raised its head. Its huge antlers flashed with white light, and then suddenly exploded. Ultimate skill, light of the soul. No one was more familiar with this ultimate skill than Dake. The light of the soul, which could express the power of the soul, had once helped him awaken the demoness beast that had been corrupted by the moon goddess. The upper limit of this ultimate skill depended on the strength of the Magister's soul. It was a typical soul skill that would be amplified by the Magister's thoughts and emotions. As the son of the hero, White should be able to obtain good results if he could use the light of the soul well and inject his courage into it. Unfortunately, without the amplification of the Magister's soul, the light of the soul was only an ordinary ultimate skill released by a 1-star magic elf. Meow Meow was illuminated by the light of the soul, but it didn't feel any heat at all. It endured the light, narrowed its eyes slightly, and broke through the light. Its sharp cat claws tore open the phantasmal beast, stag's throat. The stag tried to let out a scream, but even without the silence card, the phantasmal beast with magic attack and defense of 100, 200, and 100 couldn't make a sound after taking Meow Meow's claw. Meow Meow's agile body landed lightly on the ground, and the stag behind it instantly exploded into particles of light. White, who had just grasped Troll and Holy Sword Curse in his hands, met the gray cat's eyes as it raised its head slightly. The trace of disdain that flashed through the cat's eyes made the sensitive White feel a stabbing pain in his soul. He clenched his teeth and had the impulse to summon Troll and tear it apart. But the ripples that flowed back from Holy Sword Curse calmed his emotions. Even though he hadn't done anything at all. But reality was different. The duel was over. There were slightly noisy voices all around. Suddenly, they poured into his ears. His brain was starting to feel tired after processing the large amount of sound. A very good demonstration. After Professor Cheong-si removed the silence card, she clapped her hands and silenced the noisy little magisters. Her voice was always more effective than the silence card to silence people. The 2 students' silent incantations when they couldn't make a sound were both very good. White Gouda, in particular, was even better than I expected. So, White Gouda, 5 extra points. As soon as she finished speaking, the students of the Night Academy started clapping one after another. White's mouth was half open as he received the applause and extra points. But for some reason, he felt uncomfortable listening to Professor Cheong-si's praise. Then, Professor Cheong-si said, on the other hand, Dake Diming's communication with the enchanted fairy was very clear. With just a few glances and gestures, the enchanted fairy calmed down and correctly understood his intentions. It must have required a lot of tacit understanding. In a silent duel, this is indeed an effective method. 10 extra points for Dake Diming. 2 in 14100 plus. It's the end of the month, throw in some free tickets, *3, epsilon *. Chapter 336. As the applause grew louder, Dake and White walked through the aisles and returned to their seats. In fact, the 2's demonstration did have a very good demonstration effect. One was front while the other was back. The 2 points that one needed to pay attention to in a silent duel were perfectly displayed. Professor Cheong-si then explained in detail the problems they showed in the duel. The students gradually shifted their focus from the duel demonstration to the acquisition of knowledge. The silent duel demonstration ended faster than they expected, but it seemed to be the essence of a silent duel, to determine the winner in a short and quick duel in a silent environment. Even though they didn't need to use it now, when they were allowed to enter the dungeon, the silent duel would become an important tool to resolve disputes in the dungeon. After White sat down, Luo Boat couldn't help but say, "Don't be discouraged, Dake's magic elf is too exceptional. I thought you wouldn't be able to resist using the Holy Sword Curse. White smiled awkwardly and said, "Why would I use the Holy Sword Curse during the demonstration? I'm not as good as him now, but as long as I keep working hard, I'll catch up." Luo Boat clenched his fist and encouraged her. "Of course I believe in you. After all, Professor Midya said that you're a future hero." Werther sighed and muttered softly, "The future hero can't become a hero just by sitting down." "Is it the dungeon? I heard that the senior students obtained their core materials from the dungeon." Luo Boat, "What did you say?" White, "No, nothing." After returning to his seat, Dake casually whispered a few words to Anna and continued to listen to the lecture. He roughly understood the key to a silent duel. In addition to the silence, the biggest feature of a silent duel was that a one-star magic elf could be used as a substitute for the magic ball. A one-star magic elf was usually very weak. If the summoned magic elf had an AoE sure kill skill, it would be easy to kill it in one move. Or, he could choose an assassin-type high-speed magic elf, avoid a direct confrontation, and assassinate that one-star magic elf. In short, this was also an effective way of thinking. In such a fast-paced duel, spending a large amount of time to summon a high-star magic guiding spirit was very undesirable. At the same time, it also avoided the large commotion caused by summoning a high-star magic guiding spirit. Also, before engaging in a silent duel, it was best to communicate with the magic guiding fairies in advance so that they could understand the pattern and rules of the duel and be able to act on their own after being summoned. Although a normal magic elf only had 2.0 intelligence, it still had the basic intelligence to understand commands and could set up tactics in advance. Thus, a silent duel was like a prearranged battle formation. The Archmage would summon the magic fairy, and the magic fairy would act according to the battle plan. The final result would be a direct collision between battle plans. The duel class ended with the little magisters still wanting to continue. Some of them had almost forgotten that the dungeon adventure was about to begin. An interesting class was so attractive. But when the bell rang, the students' brain circuits seemed to have switched gears in an instant, and they were all excited again. The dungeon was an unusually important part of the academy. It was located there from the entrance. It would be a lie to say that they were not curious. Usually at this time, logic would tell them that the dungeon was dangerous and that Professor Nini was unreliable. But their emotions would tell them that the dungeon was interesting and the adventure was exciting. Moreover, they had been studying magical beasts for 2 months and more or less had some understanding of the magical beasts in the dungeon. And everyone had a full set of magic cards in their hands. Some students even secretly fantasized about stepping forward bravely after encountering a magical beast and hunting it as an adventurer. If they successfully hunted a magical beast on their first adventure, it might become something they could brag about for the rest of their lives. In short, according to Professor Nini's notice, a large number of students rushed directly to the assembly point at the entrance of the castle, and their faces were full of excitement. As for their dual textbooks, of course, they had asked a small number of students to bring them back to the dormitory. Dake was holding Anna and Luo C textbooks in his hands. He very generously accepted the request of the two of them and returned to the dormitory at a moderate pace. When he reached the dormitory, he put away the textbooks and then wrapped the multi-layered lunchbox that he had prepared with a picnic tablecloth. In his empty backpack, he put in more apple juice and milkweed juice. He also brought along a pen and paper for recording, a picture book for sketching, and a variety of survival tools. Among them, the most important one was a magic needle that was specially used in the dungeon. The magnetic field in the dungeon was chaotic, and a compass could not be used. But there was a special magic mark at the entrance of every level. Using the magic needle to record the magic power of the mark, one could always determine the direction of the entrance. This was a powerful tool for finding the way in the dungeon. Usually, every team that entered the dungeon would bring along a map recorder with a good sense of direction. If they really got lost, then they could only take the initiative to activate the dungeon escape device called the dungeon escape device. But that thing was a little expensive. I wonder if Professor Nini has prepared a dungeon escape device for us. Dake thought as he picked a palm-sized book and put it in his backpack, preparing to kill time during lunch. When everything was ready, he turned around and said to the eagerly waiting magic guide elves, "So, which one of you is willing to travel with me?" The magic guide elves glanced at the small but full backpack behind him and immediately understood his bad intentions. But even so, the excitement of being able to travel with their master still overshadowed the unhappiness of needing a backpack. Fairy Ibu was the first to raise its tentacles. But Dake shook his head, indicating that it did not meet the requirements. Fairy Ibu immediately showed a disappointed expression. After its application failed, little Ibu, who was eager to give it a try, couldn't help but shrink back. On the other side, Kettle, Dream Demon, Chocho Sea Lion, and Trash Slime, which were not convenient to carry a backpack, all retreated. Among the remaining magic guide elves, the diluted beast's mouth raised in an unconcealable arc. Then it quietly took half a step forward, making itself stand out even more. "Quickly choose me, quickly choose me." Hatcha! Moo! Who would have thought that the Hawkman and the Milk Can would suddenly raise their wings and hooves, patting their chests to show that they were up to the task. And the little demon beast was watching coldly from its perch. Every time this happened, it would feel proud of its advantage as a familiar. Finally, seeing that Dake was about to choose one of the Hawkman and the Milk Can, the diluted beast could not help but raise its hand and blurt out, "Me." Dake smiled and looked at it, quickly saying, "Then let's choose the diluted beast." Actually, he wanted to choose the diluted beast from the start. But as a magister who specialized in education, he deeply understood the principle of a bowl of water being equal. Moreover, the backpack was indeed a difficult task. If the magic guide elves volunteered, then of course, it would be better. Although the other magic guide elves felt that it was a pity, the diluted beast really had the feeling of a big sister in Dorm 201. If it was chosen, then it could only accept it wholeheartedly. Dake clearly understood the thoughts of the magic guide elves. Then he recalled the rest of the magic guide elves into the magic guide card, and then solemnly put Paradise into the card bag. No one knew what would happen in this half-a-day tour of the underground city, so bringing Paradise would be more stable. In addition, he also had the thought of using the evolved form of Trash Slime, Greedy Slime Eye. Ever since Greedy Slime 2 evolved Trash Slime Eye into Greedy Slime Eye, Dake did not have the chance to use its ultimate skill, treasure sniffing. If he could find a chance to use it, perhaps there would be unexpected gains. Obviously, even Dake could not avoid the additional fantasy of this underground city adventure. After securing the card pack, he personally placed the packed little bag on the Delu beast's shoulder. Then, he waved his hand at the little fiend beast and handed over the multi-layered lunchbox that was wrapped in a tablecloth. The little demon beast grabbed the lunchbox and flapped its wings to the left of the diluted beast. Dake looked at the tamed demon and magic guide elves with satisfaction and said, "Then, let's go." But as soon as his voice fell, a sense of déjà vu suddenly appeared in his mind. This scene, where did he see it before? For Dake Dimeng, whose mana recovery speed exceeded the human limit, maintaining the mana consumption of a 4-star magic guide elves for a long time was a relatively easy task. Dake hid the diluted beast magic guide card in his sleeve, and through skin contact, he would constantly replenish his mana. As a tamed demon, the little demon beast did not need to replenish its mana to move freely. He brought the 2 magic guide elves and quickly arrived at the entrance of the castle. "Dake, you're finally here." After Anna and Luo C saw him, their eyes lit up and they trotted over. Dark looked at the two of them and found that although the 2 girls were still wearing their school uniforms, they were wearing cute accessories subtly, which reflected their inner expectations for this spring outing. As for the 2 girls' backpack, it was indeed on Anna's back. Her backpack was stuffed with food and drinks, and it was estimated to be at least twice as heavy as Dake's. But Anna's backpack was as light as a feather. At this time, people couldn't help but sigh, as expected of the bear of the kingdom. Anna looked at Dake's diluted beast with envy and pouted, "If only I had that much mana." Luo C grabbed her hand and said with a smile, "Don't be envious, your mana is already very strong. Moreover, if you really want to be envious, you should be envious of Dake's tamed demon. Like my rabbit, at most, it can send a letter." Anna muttered, "My panda can be used as a pillow." Dake had always attracted a lot of attention. When he arrived, the little magisters would more or less look in his direction. Then, their attention would be attracted by the two magic guide elves, one white and one black. After that, it was as if a box had been opened in everyone's mind, and they were suddenly enlightened. They could not learn the existence of the diluted beast, but the existence of the little demon beast could be completely imitated. Therefore, one by one, the students also summoned their own tamed demons. In the academy, because the academy's rules explicitly prohibited students from summoning their tamed demons in the hallways, although it was often ignored, it was rare to see someone like Dake who frequently used his tamed demons. Now that the tamed demons were summoned one by one, the remaining space between the crowd was instantly filled. This made it even more lively. Dake observed the students' tamed demons and was somewhat amazed. Although the tamed demons were mainly small in size, there were always exceptions. The students' tamed demons were all strange and made people gasp in amazement. Suddenly, he shifted his gaze and saw that White and Luo Boat had also summoned their own tamed demons. Because he had not seen them for so long, he had almost forgotten what their tamed demons looked like. White's tamed demon was a knee-high minotaur. Although it looked small, it seemed to have the necessary strength. Probably because there were troll, two-headed ogre, goblin warrior, and other magic guide elves in her magic guide elven card, White's initial rejection of the minotaur gradually weakened. Gradually, she was able to look at her tamed demons with a normal attitude. It was just that this minotaur was too short. When it carried the backpack, it could directly drag it on the ground. Luo Boat's tamed demon was a round-headed robot. Its hands were multifunctional arms that could transform into various tools, and its lower body was crawler-type wheels. It looked very useful. The two hung their backpacks on the robot-tamed demon and felt very relaxed. Ding-ling-ling. When the class bell rang at 10 o'clock sharp, Professor Nini, who was already at the venue, asked the college representatives to confirm the number of students. She said excitedly, "You have to listen to me and not run around in the dungeon." "Oh yes, college representatives, please come up. I've rented a batch of dungeon escape devices. Everyone, wear them on your wrists." Looks like Professor Nini didn't forget about the dungeon escape devices. What's with renting them? Dake was taken aback. Do we have to hand in the dungeon escape devices after the adventure? Looking at Professor Nini's pained expression, Dake felt that it was true. This batch of dungeon escape devices was most likely rented by Professor Nini using her own academic credits. As a professor, it was really embarrassing. The temporary representative of the aristocrat house was a girl who often sat in the front row. She asked a few students to help and distributed the dungeon escape devices. Dake studied it carefully after receiving it. The dungeon escape device looked like a wristwatch that could be worn on the wrist. There was a cover at the top of the wristwatch that could be opened with a little force. The material of the cover itself didn't seem to be hard and could be easily broken. When the cover was opened, one could see a button inside. It was obviously a manual trigger. It could be activated passively or proactively. It could be activated with mana or manually. This was the specialty of the dungeon escape device. But it shouldn't be necessary, right? 2-in-1 4200 plus. Chapter 337. After all the students had put on the dungeon escape device, Professor Nini led them to the entrance of the dungeon. It was near the forest that was about a kilometer away from the castle. After walking for 15 minutes, they could see the round Roman palace-style building. The whole building only had 2 floors, but each floor was extremely tall. Stone pillars that were engraved with historical traces were arranged around the first floor of the building. As they walked closer, they could see the lifelike monster carvings on the stone pillars, as if they would come to life at any time. Although the first-year students had looked at this building from afar, it was the first time they had come close to it. This building that hid the entrance of the dungeon was actually of the same style as the open-air arena. But the style of the building in front of them was obviously more rugged. They walked through the stone pillars and entered the spacious passageway. They continued to walk forward in a straight line. After a few minutes, they could enter the interior of the building and see an extremely spacious open-air plaza. But the first thing that caught their eyes was not the entrance of the dungeon, but the huge stone statue that stood in the middle of the plaza. Remember the URL. M. Vipkanshu. VIP, Professor, what is that? Luo Boat, who was walking in front, pointed at the nearest giant statue and couldn't help but ask. The students behind also couldn't help but stop and look over. Professor Nini was walking in the front and was in high spirits. At this time, she casually said, "A giant statue." Luo Boat's face instantly darkened and complained, "Professor, I know that is a giant statue." Professor Nini lowered her head and looked at him with a puzzled face. "Then why are you asking me?" Luo Boat. When he was silent, Professor Nini had already skipped out of the passageway. She said excitedly, we're here. Everyone can sit down and rest for a while. You can also look around, but don't run around. At about 10:30, we will officially enter the dungeon." The students surged out of the passageway like a school of fish. Dake, Anna, and Luo C walked in the middle and just followed the flow of people into the plaza. Then, they found a stone bench and sat down. The little fiend beast that had been flying for half an hour with a lunchbox in its hand quickly landed beside him. It was so tired that it was panting. The Diru beast glanced at it in disdain, then looked around curiously. It had less experience than the little magisters, so it was even more curious. The huge stone statues standing in the middle of the square also attracted its attention. Beside him, Dake's gaze passed through the statues and observed the so-called dungeon entrance from afar. Before the entrance to the underground city was opened, it was only a 20-meter-tall arched door. The doorpost was square in cross-section, and its surface was engraved with incantation-like patterns. The door was more than 10 meters wide. The thickness of the doorpost was about 5 meters, and there was a groove on the inner side of the doorpost. He could roughly imagine that once the gate was opened, mana would be released from the ravine and form a magic gate. Every Friday between 12 o'clock noon and 12 o'clock midnight on Sunday, there would always be a large number of students entering from the front and exiting from the back. Then, if the entrance to the underground city was open like this, who would be guarding it? Dake's gaze couldn't help but turn to the huge stone statues. 1, 2, 3, a total of 12 statues. Each of the 12 colossal statues had a different appearance. Among them, there were soldiers holding spears and monsters with lion heads and human bodies. The only similarity was that each statue was more than 10 meters tall. The tallest one was even taller than the doorpost, more than 20 meters. Once they moved, it was hard to imagine. Dake's pupils shrank as his gaze fell on a giant statue with wings and a scepter in its hand. It looked like an angel. In the teachings of the saint, angels had always appeared in the image of asexual creatures. On the surface, it was to promote the purity of angels. But this giant statue that looked like an angel had distinct female characteristics. If this was placed in the saint, it would be considered heresy. I wonder which era this building and those colossal statues came from? Dake couldn't help but fall into deep thought. HM? It wasn't until the Dilu beast pulled the corner of his clothes that he suddenly woke up. It was time. All the students of the 4 departments gathered again, each of them maintaining a certain degree of excitement. The underground city was right in front of them, and their first adventure was about to come true. Professor Nini walked in front of the arched door and reached out to pat the doorpost. It was unknown what method she used, but that arched door was just as Dake thought, with a large amount of magic surging out. Soon, the magic released from the doorpost formed a water curtain-like magic door. Professor Nini pointed at the magic door and explained, "This is the entrance to the underground city. After entering from here, you will arrive at the hall of the first floor of the underground city. We usually call it the reception hall, where the underground city welcomes guests." A girl from the magic department nervously said, "Professor, there won't be monsters in the reception hall, right?" Professor Nini glanced at her and said, "I should have said that before. There is a special magic mark at the entrance of every floor of the underground city. The magic waves released from the mark will have a repelling effect on monsters, so the entrance is generally safer." Of course, repelling isn't a ban, and the entrance can't completely prevent monsters from invading. So it's still better to be careful. The girl from the magic department quickly nodded. Professor Nini raised her chin in satisfaction and said to the students, "I'll go in first to explore, you all wait a moment." As soon as she finished speaking, she had already strode into the magic door. A wave of ripples appeared on the door, and her huge body was completely swallowed up. But before the students could feel nervous, Professor Nini had already walked out from the other side of the door. She then went around the doorpost and walked back to the front. She made a hand gesture and revealed a big smile. "It's safe." Professor Nini still led the way, and the students behind her carefully stepped in. If there was a first, there would be a second. Even the less courageous students successfully stepped through the door under the guidance of the collective will. Dake followed the crowd in, and the first thing he saw was the magic mark in the middle of the reception room. It was a sculpture that looked like a mermaid floating on top of an altar. He thought for a moment and took out the magic needle from the backpack on the Diru beast's back. Then he walked towards the mermaid sculpture that was emitting a faint blue light. Unexpectedly, there were many students walking towards the mermaid sculpture at the same time as him. He looked around and found that most of the students were from the magic department. Of course, there were also students from other departments, but there weren't many. More than 10 people looked at each other and smiled. They all surrounded the mermaid sculpture and began to collect the magic of the mermaid sculpture. AI Ma from the night department and Sarah from the magic department were also among them. Professor Nini looked at the actions of Dake and the others. Her not very bright head spun for a long time before she suddenly realized that she didn't teach this part of the content. She quickly searched the small backpack on her back, but she didn't find the magic needle. That didn't actually exist. Probably because she never got lost in the dungeon, Professor Nini didn't use the magic needle, and naturally ignored it subconsciously. However, she thought for a moment and took out a magic tool that looked like a key. Then, she hopped in front of the mermaid sculpture. Then, she clapped her hands and gathered the students. Dake had just finished collecting the magic. He put away the magic needle, and looked up at Professor Nini. He originally thought that Professor Nini was going to talk about the magic needle. He didn't expect Professor Nini to just mention it and skip over the matter. Then, she took out the magic tool that looked like a key and waved it in front of the students. Seeing the confused expressions of the students, Professor Nini couldn't help but proudly say, "Does anyone know what this is?" Since no one knows, Professor Nini, is that the key to the door? Saraswati from the School of Magical Devices answered without any emotional intelligence. Professor Nini was speechless. She subconsciously shrank her neck and quickly corrected herself. "That's right. This is the key to the door. It's also called the floor key. It's an exclusive tool in the dungeon. As long as the key is activated in front of the magic marker at the entrance of each floor, you can directly teleport to the corresponding floor. The number 18 is engraved on the key in Nini's hand. It means that this is the key to teleport to the 18th floor." White, who was more concerned about the rules of the dungeon, was shocked. "There's such a convenient tool in the dungeon?" Professor Nini chuckled. "Of course. Our Shang Molian dungeon is bottomless. It's impossible to go back and forth in a day or two. It's because of the key that we can complete a certain scale of adventure in just a weekend." Dake was curious. "Then, Professor, what's the cooldown time of this key? How many people can it teleport at the same time each time?" Professor Nini raised 3 fingers. "The cooldown time is only 1 hour. After an hour, you can use it again after replenishing your magic power. As for the number of people you can teleport, Dake, 30 people." "No." Professor Nini shook her head and said, "It's 3 people. One key can only teleport 3 people at a time. To teleport more people, you'll need the advanced version of the key, the door crystal." Dake was curious. "What's the door crystal?" Professor Nini said, "The door crystal is the advanced version of the key. Its full name is the Dungeon Portal Crystal. It can teleport 30 people at a time. The cooldown time is 3 hours. After each use, It requires a large amount of magic power to be replenished, and it's very rare. Dake, then, how can we get the key and the door crystal? Can we buy them from Traveler's Street? Professor Nini said, that's one way. Some students will sell the key and the door crystal in Traveler's Street after they get it from the dungeon, but it's a little expensive. Of course, the most important way to get it is from the dungeon. The dungeon refreshes every week, and there's a chance to get the key from the treasure chests. The door crystal can only be obtained from the high-level treasure chests guarded by the bosses. Only then did the students nod their heads as if they understood something. The Shang Molian Academy's dungeon was very special in this world. In the dungeons outside, there was no such weekly refresh mechanism, and there was no such thing as treasure chests. There were only treasure chests that were used to collecting all kinds of items. The people in this world might not feel anything. However, when Dake first learned about the dungeon, he felt that it was very similar to the dungeon in the game. The Shang Molian Academy's dungeon refreshed from Monday to Wednesday. Some rare bosses needed a longer time to refresh. Therefore, the students were only allowed to enter the dungeon from Friday to Sunday. Okay. Professor Nini clapped her hands and said, for us, the door key and the door crystal are not important. Our mission today is to each hunt at least one magic beast and use their dropped items as proof. The range of activity is limited to the first to second levels. It's best if you travel with me. Those who want to move freely can apply to me after we reach the entrance to the second level. However, the condition is that you have to be in a group of 3 and have to bring the magic needle. Hearing this, the students were in an uproar. Someone couldn't help but ask, Professor, do we have to hunt magic beasts? I thought we were just sightseeing in the dungeon. Professor Nini turned her head and didn't look at him. Hey. However, even more students became excited. What's the point of sightseeing? We're here to hunt. Our goal is to slay the dragon. Let's go. People like White and Doran secretly clenched their fists. Luo Boat glanced at White and hesitated. White, do you have that magic needle? White's clenched fists loosened. She hesitated and said, I don't. What about you? Luo Boat, how could I have? White, that's true. Then we have to follow Professor Nini, right? Luo Boat, let's find someone to borrow one. The requirement is for a group of 3. Aren't we still short one person? Let's find someone with a magic needle. White nodded and said, that makes sense. Luo Boat leaned over and pointed in Dake's direction. He whispered, how about we find Dimming? He has a magic needle, and he gives us a sense of security. With him, we can even challenge a boss. White turned to look at Dake. After a moment of silence, she said, forget it. Let's find someone else. There will always be people who want to move freely but can't find a companion. Okay, Luo Boat said regretfully, you have the final say. The 2 of them started to observe in the crowd. The undercurrent in the crowd was surging. Many people had already begun to form teams secretly. It was indeed a difficult problem to form a group of 3 with a magic needle. Not everyone wanted to go on an adventure, which led to a shortage of people in some small groups. The number of people with a magic needle was limited. At most, they could form a group of 10 or so. Only a quarter of the people could apply. 2 in 14/100+. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.